Hello and good. Thank you, Councillor Peake. Councillor Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm apologise for the absence of Councillor Etheridge, who's on leave, and also have to apologise to Councillor Filmer, who's unwell and has had to leave now.
Thank you. I wish Councillor Filmer well. Okay. I think Councillor Vi, at the moment, we haven't had any apologies for, so he's currently absent. Urgent matters. I have none today. Move on to declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Are there any on tonight's agenda? And can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 12th of June 2025 as correct? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. And on that, we now would like to invite Councillor Curry as the portfolio holder for climate change and strategic regeneration to report to the committee tonight. Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. I'll just give you a few seconds, and if you'd like to briefly introduce your report, that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everyone for inviting me along this evening. Just to cover the sort of introductory bit alone, and then I'm happy to take any questions. Just to say that I'm very grateful to the officers for helping me put this report together. As you can see, there's a kind of range of stuff that I cover within my portfolio, but the key areas that I'm dealing with at the moment are frontline service delivery, the local plan, climate action, public transport and development of green spaces. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all. Are there any members who would like to ask anything? Councillor Lawrence, was that a nod? Yeah.
Chair, I was expecting a longer introduction. Obviously, is there something on the TV tonight, Simon? Thank you, Simon. Thank you for the report. 2 years in, are you still enjoying the job? Good, excellent. Obviously, the local plan is front and centre, and I'm not intending to go into any detail of the local plan, but I just wonder how the allocation of sites, particularly in the southeastern bit of Medway, sort of, and I'm talking around Lidsing, Capston, how you reconcile those in your own mind with the need to preserve environment, open spaces, and obviously there's a big section on health and well-being within the local plan, and how you reconcile those things.
Yeah, that's a really key issue, absolutely fundamental. So just to remind colleagues that the plan proposals, and this is primarily referring to housing here, I'm presuming, because obviously that's the Capston Valley and part of Rainham in the south and the east of our area. I think the key thing to remember is that, for starters, we have this government recognised need, inverted commas on the word need, but of 24,500 homes for Medway. So within the context of that, we are then obliged to try and find locations for those homes. That's done through a fairly complex process of housing, of the land availability assessments that the teams carry out, the planning teams carry out, and there's a detailed land availability report available that supports the local plan, and then the process of call for sites, where the landowners and developers can put forward their sites for development. So in terms particularly of the Capston Valley, but also in terms of other sites as well, we have been fighting for many decades, actually, the fact that our current local plan, the 2003 plan, is so out of date that our housing needs assessments are not being achieved currently at the moment. So whenever we have a housing proposal come through, and if we object to it, it goes to a public inquiry, and 9 out of 10 times we lose. This has happened twice in the Capstan Valley in the last couple of years. It's happened out at Cliff and in a number of other locations across Medway. It also happened that we actually won the Pump Lane one over in Rainham, which was an unusual win on that one. And the reason primarily for losing is that we're supposed to be delivering 1,600 houses a year according to the needs assessment and our 5-year land supply for those houses, and we're delivering just over 1,000 at the moment. So we're not achieving that figure. The new local plan takes that out of the equation. We now have allocations for all the land and the housing needs as assessed by the government. So we're in a much stronger position. However, that has meant a lot of compromise in how we work things through, and some heartache too, to be honest, and on my part as well. So, for example, as I mentioned, in the Capstan Valley, we've got a number of pressures for development there from the landowners and developers there. We've lost 2 public inquiries in the Capstan Valley, one at East Hill and one at Gibraltar Farm, and there is more to come in terms of the Lidsing development, which to all intents and purposes is at the southern end of the Capstan Valley. It lies within Maidstone, but it's been allocated already within the Maidstone Borough local plan, and that's been approved. So we've now got this huge amount of development happening piecemeal in the Capstan Valley. So in order to address that properly, rather than go back to the planning inquiry process, which is incredibly expensive for the council in terms of lawyers' fees and such like alone, never mind anything else, we are trying to work with the landowners to come up with a master plan approach to that area, for that area, in order to provide housing and secure the wildlife side, particularly 2 sites in particular. One is the Darling Banks Nature Reserve, which is an incredibly important site, and the other one is the Capstan Farm Country Park itself, which has got a very high biodiversity. So we're balancing that housing need and that housing delivery, if you like, with that in that area. And we are now currently in very detailed negotiations with Maidstone Borough Council and the local ward councillors in that area and the parishes over how the Lidsing development is brought forward, and we'll be doing exactly the same exercise with the East Hill one, which we're already in discussion, and Gibraltar Farm and any other future developments. That's the process of working with landowners, just rather than just trying to object and lose another public inquiry. So that's the kind of approach we've taken in that. And similarly with the Rainham site, that was twice the size that proposal in that area that came forward in the original planning inquiry, which we won, but nevertheless the pressure for development is very high there. So working with a consortium of small to medium enterprise developers, we are now proposing that site comes forward in the new local plan as well. Hopefully that covers what your question is, but it's about having to balance that need. I could also, if you don't mind, just one other point, is that we've got this, one of the things that came out of the local plan, if I can, Chair, just to go into a bit of background there, in the 2 public consultations, both in 23 and 24, we had a very strong a message from the population of Medway that they wanted to see. They understood the need for the housing, they understood why we had so many homes coming our way, but they said, well, you need to balance it. Don't just stick them all out at Who, don't stick them all in 1 or 2 places. We need to have a good spread. And we came up with this 40-30-30 split, which we've talked about a reasonable amount, where 40% of our new development for housing will take place on brownfield sites, and that's been allocated. Then there's 30% on the urban fringe areas, which have been identified, and then a further 30%, which will be proper greenfield sites, if you like. So, and that felt like the most even spread across Medway, so that although it means that a lot of us are going to see new development, at least it's not all happening in one place, which would be unsustainable for all sorts of other reasons. Hopefully I've covered most of what you were asking there.
Yeah, I mean, the other answer would be not to have accepted the allocation of sites in Capstan Valley and preserved the green space. But I was just, the sort of supplementary question to that part of it was, are you embarrassed by the fact that you campaigned and your group campaigned in opposition to protect Capstan Valley, but you've just handed it over for development in this local plan? Does that concern you? I mean, also Chatham Docks is another example where in opposition you do one thing, but in power you've decided to do something else.
I think, I mean, there's two parts to your question, really. There, firstly, that's clearly a political question. I'm not sure how much I need to handle the politics of this.
It's not political.
On the practical
yeah,
side, I'll tackle that from the practical point of view. As colleagues know, I moved to Medway in the 1980s, and I was in charge of Capstan Farm Country Park. That area I know, and I've worked in my whole career, if you like, in different ways. So I'm very sad that we're seeing areas of it now being developed. But on a personal note, that's quite hard for me to take, actually. So there is no argument there about this has never been easy. This is a choice we have between achieving what the government targets are for housing in Medway, which we don't have a choice about. The previous government had a similar figure to us, and the current government has come up with the same figure. That's their target across the country. They've allocated these, well, they've identified these housing needs for all local authorities. So we don't have there's no argument about that. Where we then put them is down to us, and we have to find what we consider to be the most sustainable sites. And that's taken 2 years of really hard work and detailed discussions. So it's not been easy. I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. And you're right, back in, previously that I was doing my best not to see development there. But the reality of the situation we're in now is either we take the housing allocation from Capstan and stick it all out at Who, which I know would be a disaster in its own way and certainly not be sustainable. I mean, I think the allocation for Who at the last version of the local plan, which didn't get through council, was about 12,500 homes, which is we've now reduced that to just over 6,000. So I think it's that balance and that even spread across all communities that we were trying to achieve. And I think what we've got here is the most appropriate approach to that.
Okay. Chair, thank you. Thank you for that answer, Simon. It's an honest answer. Thank you, and I appreciate the honesty in that answer. Do you think, and this is more of a strategic question, when we're considering large-scale planning, we actually take into account the impact on existing communities before we decide to dump 800, 900, 2,000 houses at the end of existing developments? And also the way the Section 106 monies are allocated, where a lot of it gets, and I'm thinking about Gibraltar Farm here as an example, where a very large chunk of Section 106 monies was obtained from the developer, but only 90,000 of it was going to be spent actually on improving things for the community in Hempstead, for example.
Okay. I'll try and answer that one. I'm not sure I can answer the one on Section 106 because I don't have the detail on that, so apologies. Yep. I can always take that away and come back to you with an answer on that one, so apologies for that. Hang on. But just in terms of your general point there about the impact on existing communities, well, yes, the answer is absolutely. We are conscious of this. I mean, as I say, I've been in Medway myself for decades, and I've seen this gradual growth of our community. I think the latest figure that I heard for Medway's population was in excess of 290,000 people who live here now. That's the latest figures. I think with the new developments, we'll see 350,000 people living in the current Medway area. So that population rise is happening, and we can see it writ large. And in the context of that, you've got new people coming in, and we want to make sure that the resources and the infrastructure is there for those new people, but at the same time, the big impact on existing communities is also very loud. I was at a meeting of residents over in Strood just last week, talking to them, and there was some very concerned individuals over there, and I have great sympathy for them. There will be changes over the next 15 years. Where these development sites are happening, it will mean change in people's communities. And how we manage that and how we do that properly is the role of the council. And in that context, what we've done already, a draft infrastructure delivery plan has been produced, and we have already set up a team, or teams actually, plural, and there's a couple of examples I can give, of officers looking at the different infrastructure needs in those areas so that the local communities do get the resources they want. I would say that's caveated with support from government, support from the private sector, investment coming in, and all the other things. These things are never done without funding and costs, and obviously over the 15-year delivery period of the plan, we'll have to make sure that that's in place. The feedback as well, Section 106 is not a panacea. It's a limited sum, and the details of our Section 106 funding are published every year, as they always have been and have to be by law, through the Planning Committee, and the conditions attached to planning applications are always there writ large and in the public domain, so people can see how the money is being spent. As I say, with the Gibraltar Farm thing, I don't know the details of that. So.
I mean, it'd be great if you wouldn't mind, maybe after today's writing to us with a couple of examples of where impact has been recognised on existing communities and what's been done to mitigate that impact on that community. Because I think some examples of how this is going to happen would be really useful. So I don't want to spend any more time on the local plan. I think the public inquiry section of it will tease out the fact that Section 106 isn't going to deliver the infrastructure at all to deliver the local plan. And I do hope that planning, you know, when we get to the point of actually getting to individual sites, that we actually do not build without the infrastructure, because we're going to turn Medway into an absolute gridlock. Just some other questions. I noticed planning, you mentioned planning, and I think everyone in the committee would acknowledge the great work done by the planning team. You know, whether we agree with the local plan or we've got problems with the local plan, they've conducted a good service. I'm a bit concerned about planning enforcement and the resources that we, as a council, we commit to planning enforcement. Everything from TPOs to sites that are illegal. Do you think we commit enough money to planning enforcement? And in your view, if you could write, if you could write the blank check, you know, what do you think planning enforcement needs in order to make sure that people who do take advantage are actually caught in time? Because things like TPOs, for example, if I understand the rules, if you cut down a tree and it's not dealt with within 6 months, then that's gone.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm looking at the assistant director on this. I think we have 3 enforcement officers. I believe so. Yeah, it's difficult to recruit them. It's not a popular role, I must confess, in planning. So getting them in is hard work. But we've got a team. I would probably say, if I asked the head of planning, what would he prefer? He'd probably say 6. I don't know. I mean, you know, what officers are loved. They'd love that to be the case. So I don't think there'll ever be enough from certainly the officers and the senior management side. I think they love the more resources, but we went through 15 years of austerity, and consequently we haven't got the staff that we would love to have as a result of that. Having said that, I know that the team do the best they can to bring about the enforcement. I know that we've got certainly, I mean, people are aware that the tree officer we've got is one of the most knowledgeable tree officers I've ever come across in my whole life. You know, he's unbelievable. He's encyclopedic is the only word to describe. And he really works incredibly hard and has done for a long time, not just under Medway, but under the previous Gillingham Authority, with doing what we can on trees. But it's never enough. And I would agree with you there. I mean, it would be fantastic if we could have more.
Well, I'm sure you get lots of support from our side if there were a budget for more planning enforcement. I think that would happen. When do you think bus service use or bus use will return to pre-COVID levels? Because once again, you know, we've had bus reports. We've had Chair and I talk regularly about buses at this committee. You know, a lot of the local plan depends on increased use of buses. There is, if you talk to residents, there's a general feel that this council's now got an anti-car slant. Things like active travel as well to replace. I mean, are these, I suppose my specific question is on bus service. When do you think, despite everything we're doing, including the free weekends, that bus use is still below where it was COVID? And do we think active travel really is a substitute for getting around Medway, especially east-west, where things like the bus services aren't really serving the population that well?
You're talking to somebody else who has, not maybe as passionate as the chair, but nearly about buses. So I think, to start with, I think we have had a car culture. I hate to use the word driven, but that's a pun, if you like, in the midst of that, for a long time. Not just here in Medway, but generally. Going back decades, it's always been car first, and buses, public transport, pedestrians, cyclists come somewhere down down the queue, if you like. That has to change. We have currently, we know that, I mean, starting with the strategic level, and just to, I mean, I think it's in the report that I am the Vice Chair of Transport for the South East. So looking across the whole of the South East, we have got a huge problem with too many cars on the road at the moment, and vans and lorries and stuff as well. We know that junction 1 of the M2A2 is at capacity. We know that other junctions further down, certainly junctions 3 and 4, are very close to capacity, and the Lidsing development is probably going to take junction 4 over capacity. So we've got some massive issues that need to be dealt with at that strategic level to deal with how we cope with the traffic volumes that are coming through and will come through, not just to development in Medway, but if you look at the housing need identification for the Swale area, for Gravesham and Dartford, they're very high as well, and Tunbridge and Morning is even higher. So there's more coming all across this region of Kent and the South East, and how we deal with that at a strategic level is something Transport for the South East, Department of Transport and National Highways are looking at in a lot of detail. And the solution, and it's written into the Department, into Transport for the South East strategy, is integrated transport. We cannot function unless people have the choice, the modal choice of moving from car to bus or train and that kind of thing. That has to be writ large and built into all our planning for this. So as part of the infrastructure delivery for our local plan, we know that 24,500 houses could easily mean another 50,000 cars in Medway, and we just can't cope with those volumes of cars, so we have to do something about it. So currently officers are working on a new local transport plan for Medway. The current local transport plan expires next year. The new one has already begun to be written and will be published next summer. We've just approved the consultation process on that at the last cabinet, and that's now in the process of going through. We will have this local transport plan. Our bus service improvement plan and our local bus plans are also in place. And fantastic news recently, I mean, you may well have heard, in our bus service improvement plan, we had the biggest cash injection from government on that we've ever had, which is already being spent on transport issues and providing the free stuff that we've been doing. And it's about a cultural change partly as well. I mean, I'm a driver. I'm not anti-car. I've always driven. I've driven since I was a teenager. So it's not as if we're anti-car. It's just that we know that cars aren't the solution for the future. Whether they're electric or whether they're diesel or whether they're petrol, there's just too many of them. So it's not about, you know, trying to control pollution, although that comes along with the whole mix. It's about how we deal with the volumes of traffic. And what we're seeing now is a much greater shift towards integrated transport. As I say, it's in the Transport for the South East strategy, and that's the way forward. It has to be. So more people choosing to go on the bus because it's reliable, it's affordable, and it gets them to between A and B, and there's lots of it. That's the solution. If you go to parts of London now, you can do that. There are not many cars on the road in parts of London anymore because everyone jumps on the tube or the bus or whatever, and it works brilliantly well. So there's no reason why that can't be translated here. It's working well in cities like Leeds and Birmingham and Bristol. There's a really good public transport network setting up. Medway needs that. That's our aspiration, is a Transport for Medway programme where we can do that. The government is helping a lot with that. The new bus bill comes to Parliament this year, which will allow us non-mayoral authorities to do franchising. So we've got that choice, and that's something we would really seriously want to look at. How the model of that might work for Medway, we'll wait and see. But we're also really working very well with our private bus companies. We have a really good active travel group. The bus companies are involved with that. We also, and that's cross-party, we also have regular bus meetings talking to them on all sorts of issues, and I attend those meetings. So Arriva, our biggest provider, has been investing heavily in Medway. They've spent a lot of work on their Gillingham depot recently. So they're very keen. They see an opportunity from a business point of view to expand within Medway with the new population growth we've got. So it's worth their while investing. We are going to see a lot more bus travel over the next few years. But we're starting from a low base. It's only been 2 years into our administration since we've been doing this work, but we're going to get there, and it's a passion of mine, and it's a passion of many of my colleagues as well to see that happen. So it's a beginning of a journey, pardon the pun again. It's a beginning of a journey to move, to give people that modal choice in order for them to choose, to select not jumping in their car every time they walk out their front door.
I was going to say, just popping out, you still talk about buses here?
I was going to. Yeah.
Excellent. Have another crack on buses before I come in on my...
I can see you're gagging to come in about buses there, Chair. I think we're not London, we're not Leeds, and the problem here is we don't have the infrastructure that was built many years ago, particularly around trams and trains. We have trains on the periphery, but because we have our London services, but they're not particularly connected to buses. And what I'm worried about is there is almost like this, planners are playing a sim game where everyone gets on the bus runs 24 hours a day, and it goes everywhere you want it to go in a direct route. But the reality is people have got to get to work, drop children off, do shopping. So that there is a different reality of actually living to the one that you probably have when you go to meetings full of bus enthusiasts. The problem, that one of the dangers, the part of the issue I have about planning is there is an attempt to impose on the population a vision of the world where, with all the consultation in the world, never quite is reflected in what actually gets printed. So I just make the point that actually what I'd like to see personally is I'm very conscious of the number of white vans doing deliveries, Uber drivers doing food deliveries. So a lot of the increase in traffic is because there has been a cultural shift to having a lot more stuff delivered from home. Right now, I think if you could start looking at that end of it, you would actually find ways of reducing car traffic. But there is in the local plan, again, we talk about the 15-minute city. Everything's within 15 minutes of you. It's very clearly stated. It's a very socialist-like paradise of how we live, where we work, we shop, we take all of our leisure activities within 15 minutes of where we live. Now, you can actually do that in London. I agree with you. I've lived in London. I was brought up in London. I used to go to school at Waterloo. I used to walk to get the train, get a bus everywhere. This is Medway. It's not London. We don't just have that. You cannot create that infrastructure. I mean, some people get quite excited about doing a tram. And, we've got that plot of land between Gillingham High Street and the Chatham Waters, which was an old line. But, trams, to put a tram in, is £35–40 million a kilometre. So I could understand the bus plan if there was any money behind it. But the amount of money being committed builds a few bus shelters, upgrades a few buses, upgrades a bit of infrastructure at bus garages. It doesn't actually build a solution that people are going to buy into. I'm sorry about the statement. There was no question in there, Simon. But please do it.
Yeah, I mean, I can completely understand your point, but we're faced with a very stark choice here. We either have to put up with another 50,000 cars in Medway, or we do something about it. And that's what this local plan is trying to achieve. And that's what this administration is saying. We've got to do something about it. And you're right. What is the solution? Well, the solution is not to have as many cars. And it's as simple as that. And in order to achieve that, we need to say, well, how are we going to help people travel around and move around without jumping into their car? And so a good example of how planning does work is the approach that, this has been seen across the country. Seriously good quality planning is taking place in a lot of places, is about this integrated transport. So in the proposals for local plans, Strood Station, and you say we've got them on the periphery, actually we've got mainline stations right the way through the heart of Medway, all of which link our town centres together brilliantly. So there is a way of using those and utilising those to move people between our town centres to help on the rejuvenation of our town centres, and that's that's part of the thinking we're involved in. But particularly Strood, we own the land next to Strood, so we've looked very carefully at that, and we've spoken to the bus companies, and we've said we can put in a bus hub next to Strood Station. It'll have electric charging because there's no shortage of electricity at the railway station. I know that Network Rail have plans to spend money at Strood Station and in all sorts of different ways. And that station links to London, it links to the Margate and that coast there, and it also links to Maidstone and the rest of Kent. It's a perfect location. It also, from that position, the buses, I know it's a shame that we lost the rail link out to Charnel Street through the original sort of housing infrastructure fund arrangements, and that's still a pipe dream. I think it probably is a pipe dream. But we could then link out to new developments at Who and a bus hub out at Who, which is part of the planning again, to put that out there to make sure that there's a regular service up and down 4 Elms Hill, bringing people into Strood on a regular bus service, probably every 20 minutes, every half an hour, so that people can come in and out without jumping in their car. Now, that will take thousands of cars off the road.
And cost millions and millions.
And it will
pounds.
cost, I'm not saying there is no cost involved, of course there's cost involved, but that cost comes at a huge benefit to the community, and it's over a 15-year period. I think it's doable. That's a passion I have for it. I think we can do it. I think we'll have support of government, and I think we'll have support from the private sector as well. The bus companies are certainly really happy there's going to be a bus hub at Strood. They're delighted by that. So we've spoken to them about it. So there's all that benefit that we can see coming as a result of proper planning, and that's where it goes back into the planning system and making it work. Thank you,
Well, Chair, I've just got one more question. Just on green spaces, Simon, obviously I think I've got this number right. We cut £800,000 out of the green services budget. £500,000 of that was because of increases in national insurance, for example, and there was a further cut of 300,000. I don't know about you, but as I drive around Medway, the place looks untidy, it looks shabby. You know, when the grass is finally cut, you've got a big layer of grass cuttings on the thing. We're removing trees, leaving stumps along the road, particularly in my neck of the woods. We're very lucky to have the greenery that we do, but as trees are removed because they're rotten, we're cutting them off at 2 or 3 feet and leaving the stumps. And then when I've asked about replacement of those trees, because I think they offer a utility to have those trees, we're told there's no money. Are you satisfied with the amount of money that we're spending on maintaining our green spaces?
I think, again, I really don't recognise the figures that you've just given me, the 800. I mean, I don't have access to those figures offhand. I mean, I'd have to check on that. So I'm not sure those are accurate or not. But I would say, again, going back to what you asked about planning enforcement, we could always do loads better. When we came into the administration 2 years ago, we inherited a green space setup that had been fragmented across different services in Medway, so that Medway North had a whole chunk of the management side of it and maintenance side of things. There was also a development team placed in one part of the council, and the trees were looked after in a different part. All that kind of it was quite sweet. So what we've done, just in the last year, really, it's taken a bit of time to pull it together. We've pulled it together and put it all into one directorate. So that makes a lot more sense and makes it much more coherent. So that's sort of back office stuff to get that side of it sorted. In addition to that, we've managed to maintain our 8 green flags, which we're very proud of, and that's something to be welcomed. And thanks to all the staff, both in Medway North and the office and the council staff and the volunteers, for maintaining those green flags despite budget constraints throughout. I have to confess that in the light of making budget choices, if we say what comes before green spaces and adult social care and children's care is saying, well, actually, we haven't got enough money, or the housing team are saying, we really need to so we've got all these homeless people, we need to help them, then I get it. In the budget constraints that we've got, then green spaces will be cut, and that's understandable. And, it's the world we live in terms of council budgets, which are so strapped. And obviously, the care of our people comes before that. What we've done in terms of management, you're saying we look scruffy. That's an emotive point, but I think it's also a sort of depends on your point of view. If you love a wildflower meadow, then it's not scruffy at all. It's biodiversity writ large, and it's great to see. We've got a lot more biodiversity here in Medway than we had 2 years ago as a result of how we've changed mowing regimes and done things differently. And bearing in mind that 1 in 6 species in Kent and Medway are threatened, with extinction. The more we do on biodiversity, the better, frankly. And that's just the position. Maybe we differ on that, I don't know. But so there is that. Management trees is a challenging thing, and I get it, and it's not new. I mean, there are trees near where I live which have been stumps in the ground for the last 10 years or more. So it's not just across the work we've been doing on trees. Trees, again, is something we really do need to address. The planting of new trees, but the protection of our existing tree stock is just as important. And that approach of the urban forest and how Medway is very much a treed place, and I mean, it used to be even more so back in the past when they were supplying timber for the dockyards and stuff like that. So there is an issue around the tree management, so I'd love to do that better, and when the resources and when they become available, we certainly will do that better.
Thank you. So before I come to Councillor Campbell, I've got to ask a bus question or two. Arriva were given money under PSIP for introducing increased bus services on Sundays, which has been really successful in my ward, particularly in the Route 190. But they're now proposing to cut services by a third on the daytime frequency on that. What are we doing proactively to actually, tell them if we're going to invest in, subsidised routes on Sundays, you shouldn't be cutting our routes during the days? And the second thing is Medway seems to have quite a slow uptake on electric buses. What are we doing? What are we doing to engage with Arriva? What are we doing as a planning authority to look at potential government grants and working with all the other operators as well? So just those two quickly.
Yeah, great questions, and it is always a challenge. I mean, working with bus companies in the private sector, as you know, is a difficult job because they always look to the bottom line in their finances to run routes or not run routes. And I agree that hearing them wanting to cut back service is disappointing, but at the end of the day, they're making those commercial decisions because that's how they work. What we are doing, and I think I mentioned to Councillor Lawrence, is that we're meeting with them on a regular basis. Got to know them quite well, actually, over the last couple of years. And they are certainly keen. Arriva, in particular, as the largest provider of buses, is already investing in Medway and plans to do more. And they've already spoken to me about electric buses and charging at the Gillingham depot. If they can get the supply, it's about electricity supply. That's the main thing that stops that from happening in any simple, quick way, is how you get the volume of electric, volume is the right word or whatever, the amount of charge into the depots as you can. And certainly in terms of the plans I mentioned for Strood and Who with bus hubs there, they will be, electricity will be provided in that. So that's the future, will be electric. There is a bus service operating around the Borstal area run by New Venture, which is electric. It's a trial run, it's working well, but they have to charge it down the bottom of Bluebell Hill and then send it up Bluebell Hill to run. And they're just trialling that at the moment. So it's kind of not quite our first proper electric service, but it's there and it's operating. I think the nice thing to see as well, I mean, just going slightly off the question, is the number of delivery vans that are now electric. So a lot of the companies that are either running from supermarkets are sending out a lot more electric vehicles, and even the white vans that you see, a lot of those are now electric. I've spoken to a number of local firms who have electric charging within their depots where they keep their vehicles and they charge them up every day. So that's improving. But so in terms of how we deal with the bus, it's keeping on talking, keeping encouraging them to invest and saying to them, look, if we keep providing that growth, so a good example of how we can provide growth is the free bus weekends, 32% increase on the last one from the previous year, which is brilliant to see. The bus services for children and families over the summer holidays and school holidays encourages that mentality. I mentioned it right from the start of coming out your front door and not getting in your car but catching the bus increases the numbers of passengers. We haven't reached pre-COVID numbers yet, but the numbers are increasing year on year, and we have a target of 9 million by 2028, which is in our climate change action plan. I think it's around about over 7.5 million people using buses currently on an annual basis in Medway, and a target. And if we can say that to the bus companies, then it makes it worthwhile investing in the routes, and that's all about how we can encourage them to do that. So that's the approach we're taking.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I must say, I never thought I'd hear Councillor Lawrence describe socialist paradise in such loving terms. 15-minute cities, so well connected. I'm delighted. Let's work together to get there. So I wanted to ask about the local plan consultations to start off with. So I've seen since this new administration how much effort, and I said this at the special meeting of the Council for Council as well, yourself personally, but also Dave Harris and his team have put into this. There's been such drive behind it, such passion to bring it to the stage. So it's quite disheartening to see often misinformation and just really stubborn NIMBYism being put out there, misdirecting the public. It's really, it's not helpful because we have a housing crisis. We need to provide the housing. And like you've described so eloquently, it's about finding that balance, isn't it, between sustainability. So perhaps I'm really naive, but I do think public consultations are so helpful in dispelling those myths and getting out to people, getting the message out. And I'm really hopeful that they'll see and speak to senior council officers and councillors and portfolio holders and actually understand the difficult choices and the rationale behind what that is. So this round of consultations, I just wanted to get a sense from you, how is it going? Are people actually engaging, and are you getting enough number of people coming in? Do they understand what the plans are?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's so important getting the consultation right. So as I mentioned in a previous question, we've had this is our third round of consultation on it, major consultation. We did 2 of the Reg 18 ones. We were only supposed to do 1, but we chose to do a second one last year because it's so important. And getting the Reg 19 one through is a more complex process because that's much more structured level of consultation. So we've had a smaller response. But we do feel that smaller response is partly because we've done so much previously. We've done a huge, I mean, I must give special mention to our comms team as well, who've done a huge amount to get the message out there. I can't think there's anybody in Medway. We've had like tens of thousands of hits on our website and various social media things in response. So I don't think there's many people out there who don't know that Medway Council has got a local plan in draft form now, I mean, honestly, which is fantastic work by them to get that message out there. And I've even had to do podcasts myself, which I've never done before, so it's been quite interesting. But that process is hugely important. So I haven't seen the numbers because the Reg 19, the legal word for it is Regulation 19 consultation, closed on Monday. I haven't seen the numbers on how that's been, how the response has been on that. But I think it's been pretty good. But it won't be as high as the previous 2. But what we did say, the Reg 19 consultation has got quite a formalised filling out forms structure to it on the website and that sort of thing. And I've seen responses from the other parties on this. Certainly the Conservative group have sent us a detailed response, so the Independent group, using the forms in that way. But what we said to as many people as you can, just send us an email and we'll still build it in, we'll still take it, make sure you get your voice heard. So important. That's why I've been out myself, meeting groups. I was at All Hallows Parish Council last night talking about local plan issues with them. We met with the Strood residents just last week, and other colleagues of mine have been helping with that as well in so many ways, just to talk to as many people and make sure people don't feel they're left out of the process. It's not perfect, but it certainly helped a lot to do that sort of work. So wait and see on the numbers for Reg 19, but I think it has worked pretty well.
Thank you. And I've seen all the social media posts. And like you said, the comms team just keep pushing it out in spite sometimes of getting a lot of negativity and misinformation back. So I'm really hoping that this has been a positive experience and people have learned more and understood what's happening with the local plan. In terms of waste management, I wanted to start with my compliments to the waste collection teams. I think they're excellent in the work that they do. Today was my bin collection day, so it's very fresh in my mind. They're really, really good. And every time I've been to the household waste or recycling center to take my waste there, they are so helpful there, the staff. They are so professional. And inevitably, I'll show up in a state of confusion. I've got all kinds of random items in the boot of my car, and they'll very patiently tell me where to go, and it's really helpful. And they seem to have a place for everything. So I don't think those centers would function basically without the staff. I think they're very, very critical in spite of all this sort of signposting and, as much automation is there. They're so critical and they're so helpful. That being said, I genuinely don't think there are enough bins around. I don't think there are enough bins on the high streets. I don't think there are enough bins. When I go on my dog walks, I regularly see overflowing bins. Now, I do report them as and when I see them, but I really feel more work could be done in perhaps looking at where bins could be deployed more, and making it easier for members of the public to raise those issues and say, actually, we think, I have a constituent currently who's extremely engaged and very active, and he's done a lot of work contacting the council. I only did a minor part supporting him to get a bin installed at a spot that he had identified was a problem spot. And that's great. We need more citizens like that. But I just feel like maybe we could think about putting more bins, more dog bins. Dog poo is still such a problem. And the bins that are there, I don't think they're always emptied regularly, especially Sundays. I seem to, every time I'm walking around, those little bins, you know, on the lamppost where you're putting dog poo and stuff, they just get so full so quickly. And then you keep adding to it and it just all spills over, you know, it just, so I don't know what the schedule is for emptying these bins and checking them, but I feel like we could do a bit more for that. If you...
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand, and obviously it's that sort of never-ending. I think of these sorts of things as the forever services. There will always be rubbish. They will look to be removed and dealt with. There will always be bins to be emptied. Street cleansing itself is a massive issue, and I think that's one of the things that we need to be conscious of. That this doesn't ever stop. It goes on forever. I agree with you on the HWRC. The staff are brilliant. I mean, I've met with them, I've talked to them, and they're really passionate. They really care about recycling. They're environmentalists writ large. It's their day job, if you like. It's passionate about looking after the environment. And the team behind them, within the directorate there, are just fantastic and passionate about what they do. We do have a number of things in place. I'll get onto the bins in a moment, because that's quite a complex one. But we do have a number of things we're doing. So we've got our new waste strategy, our waste improvement plan, which is currently being written and will come forward. We're very conscious that we have to do much more to reduce the volume of waste that people produce. That is always a problem, and the supermarkets are aware of it, and the kind of waste that's produced. You'll notice there's a lot less plastic packaging around than there used to be. It's more cardboard, because that's easier to recycle and much better for the environment. That's going to take time to come about. Reduce, reuse, recycle. That mantra that's been around since the 1970s, I think, is still very prevalent today than it was, and that's the big drive behind our waste improvement plans going forward. You're right about the collection. Again, the team are passionate, and they absolutely love the new vehicles that we've managed to provide. They weren't cheap, but they're well worth having, and they're all in place now, and they are really environmentally friendly compared to what the old ones were and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of improvements already taking place that we've brought in the last couple of years. As far as the bins are concerned, I think it's two sides to that. One is that you're right, there probably never is enough bins, but they cost money to empty. So again, you have to balance that between how much does it cost for a team in a van to go around and put out the sacks and or do all that work, and how many times they have to do that, and it costs so much per bin. I'm trying to think of the figure. I did know it. I think it's about £70 a bin or something like that for every bin that gets emptied. It may be more. I mean, I'm looking at the assistant director, or deputy director, on that one. So, assistant director, apologies, on that one. So I think we need to be conscious of the cost involved. There is also a legacy problem, and it's been around. I can see bins not far from where I live that have got Rochester Medway City Council still on them, and they're not used. And they're empty, or they're just the shell of a bin. So we've still got a lot of that sort of public realm improvement to do as well, where we take out stuff that isn't used anymore and we replace it, or we don't put it back because it's no longer needed where it is, and we think about new locations. So there's that big public realm improvement approach, and that's something that we've been certainly in the last few months as a council, we've been looking at in a lot of detail. I know that we've got one of the senior teams in the directorate has now been given that role of public realm management, if you like, and we're looking at it not just our high streets and our town centres, although that's hugely important, but it's across the piece. It's our streets, it's our smaller town centres like Twiddle or Lordswood or those sorts of areas, and it's our villages as well, and how we improve the public areas of those. And that's something that we're really focusing quite a lot on now as a council, and how we can get through to that, working very closely with our town centre forums and stuff like that on that as well. So there's certainly work to be done, dealing with those legacy issues of stuff that have been around many, many years and should have been sorted a long time ago, and for whatever reasons they haven't been, but also thinking about how we manage things going forward for the future. And bins is certainly part of that. So it's not perfect, but it's in the plans that we've got. going forward.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
that
So it'd be
helps.
great to see that as part of the strategy, like you said, the waste strategy, and to see some improvement. I mean, I think what you said previously about public transport, the same principle of cost-benefit analysis applies here. There is a cost for emptying bins, but equally, if you've got a lot of litter around it or just people leaving stuff around, you've got to pay somebody to go and then pick those up manually. I live close to the Chatham Town Football Club, and you can kind of see in the field, the grounds behind it, there's all kinds of litter lying around, just people kind of passing through when they have fixtures and things like that. So I guess you still have to pay somebody to go and clear all of that up. So perhaps more bins, but in a sensible way, where with the most impact, if they're placed, that would help. But anyway, I feel like you're already across that, so I'll leave that. The final thing, if I may, Chair, the final thing I wanted to ask is about the, so the green flag status, green spaces, that's really exciting that Medway has so many of them. And some time ago, I asked if in my ward, for example, the Maidstone Road Cemetery, it's so well used, so many people come there, but there are parts of it which are quite neglected. Like there's a wall that collapsed, I think more than a year ago. There's still an enormous mound of broken wall and cement and stuff in a corner in the cemetery, and that wall is still not fixed. It's quite unsightly, and I think for a public space, it's so precious. The trees there are absolutely glorious, and the way the graves are maintained, it's so beautiful there. I see all kinds of people using it, you know, people paying respects to their loved ones, but also children coming in there learning to ride their bikes. It's a very special place, I think. When I asked about improvement for that, I was just told funding is an issue. It's just not one of those target green spaces. But see, Section 106 money would be ideally spent on places like that, perhaps. And I recently visited London. I visited some friends in London, and they had a cemetery right in the middle of these really urban spaces, like high-rise apartments and a little old ancient cemetery, where they had kind of kept it wild, maintained that sort of look of timelessness, and they were allowing people to come in and grow things or forage things that were growing there. But what they'd invested in, the council had invested in, was great signs within there to talk about, to encourage people to come in, talk about the heritage of the place, why this place was so precious, what were the oldest graves and things like that. It was such a great place. I spent several hours there. It was such an oasis of calm in the middle of this urban space. I just think that we could probably look at something like that for that space. But I know that's a very specific ward issue. I'm just plugging it now because then I'll email you afterwards and then you'll have to respond to me.
That's fine. I could pick up a little bit on that one, if that's okay, Chair, in the sense that obviously with, I don't know the detail of what you said about the collapsed wall, and I can look into that, certainly. That's not a problem. I agree with you about the way we can create these sort of areas of calm. I mean, ideally, in any community, and this is Fields in Trust, the national charity who look into this, their perfect world would be a green space within about 3 to 5 minutes walk of everybody's home. And however we achieve that, the benefits of health and well-being alone is just massive if people have got green spaces that close to their home. So we're always looking at how we can improve on that with identifying new sites and stuff like that. I think one of the issues around cemeteries in particular is that balance between public use and the respect that's needed for the site itself, and particularly for the relatives of those going to visit graves and stuff like that. And I know there were some issues around the Maidstone one a couple of years ago in terms of sort of some people were gathering there and playing football and stuff like that, and that was gently but very politely stopped because you can't really allow cemeteries to become public parks. That wouldn't work. But having said that, they're great places to go and walk and reflect and stuff like that as well. So they can be used as green space, but in a particular way. One of the things we are doing, and I mentioned earlier in response to an earlier question, was about how we've, over the last 2 years, we've brought together the green space services under one directorate now. And that's going to make a huge difference. And part of the plan, the strategy for that, is to have a management plan for each site. Now, this is going into sort of my day job. Writing management plans like that for a site isn't too onerous and complicated, but what it does mean is you can focus on the issues for each site. And we've got that process underway. Some of our important green space sites, especially the green flag ones, have management plans specific for them. And the intention is to have one for all our green spaces, and that would incorporate our cemeteries as well. Partly how we manage the visitor use of them, but also how we manage them for biodiversity and landscape as well, and stuff like that. So that is again, it's in the thinking, but we're 2 years in, so these things do take time. And as I mentioned earlier, green spaces, when it comes to council budgets, is not that high on the agenda for very valid reasons. So we are working at it, and we'll hopefully get there. But I'll pick up that issue on the Mason Road for you as well.
For the record, you always respond to my emails, and you are incredibly helpful. I was just joking.
So just before we come to Councillor Peake, just to go back on a little bit that you mentioned there, £70 per dog being emptied. Sorry, you can obviously clarify that figure. I suspect is probably the way we said that thing.
Yeah, apologies if I've given a wrong figure there.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's £70, but can we come back with a figure? I'll certainly get a figure for you.
I mean, if it's in that region, that makes me a little bit concerned about how we're managing that contract with Medway North. And there probably will be a matter for future scrutinies when we talk about, obviously, when we have the annual discussion with them. So I'm sure we'll have that information ahead of that annual discussion.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take it away and find out the figure for you. Yeah?
It was a wrong figure probably. But I would say, just very briefly, Chair, if I may, on the dog issue, obviously most of our bins now are combined, so people can dispose of their dog waste in any bin as long as a little sign is on saying that they can, and then that goes into the waste stream through that way. So people should not leave dog waste on the ground, as simple as that. Yeah, there's no need to, and it shouldn't happen.
Absolutely, I think we can all agree on that. Councillor Peake.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I must say it's really galvanising hearing you speak about these matters, and the conversation that we've had. I mean, it's fair enough to challenge. That's the whole point. We're a scrutiny committee. I just want to give you a little bit of feedback. For what it's worth, it's not scientific, but you know the second brown bin scheme, because we've just been talking about bins. I belong to a social network, and roughly speaking, a good 2/3 of them, they are Conservative voters. They all know my politics. We had a conversation about this, and every single one of them gave it the thumbs up, saying it was a sensible and a fair thing to do. You mentioned the bus weekends, a 32% increase in usage. Is that correct, 32%?
For the free bus weekend, the last one we had, yeah.
So that just shows you the potential that could be there. And I will link that to, you may think, what are we doing here? I'm interested in the impact all this has on Medway. And it's just, again, as a personal example, my brother and his wife moved into the wharf next to Rochester Station a few weeks ago. My brother is a self-confessed petrol head. And he will watch all those programs and all the rest of it. But a major part of their decision to go into development next to the railway station where there's a bus stop just outside was a major part of their decision. So I'm really galvanised by the idea of long-term politics. I'm sure there's a lot of us, I think the public in general, are sick and tired of headline politics, short-term politics. And even if there is a huge cost in making up the idea of connection so you can get public transport working, I would argue that that is something that's really worthwhile and definitely would support. And if it could include trams, I don't know if that's a fantasy, but last year, going to Manchester, the convenience, the efficiency of the tram system there at the cost, I mean, I was really impressed. I must admit, I was a bit like a kid getting on and off as well, I admit to that. You mentioned about too many cars. Have you seen the report recently that's come out about the huge increase just in the last 12 months of the impact of the increase of vehicle usage on our roads, and that along with the sustained overheating of the roads and the damage it's having on things like potholes and stuff like that. So I wouldn't mind some kind of cut back on that. Now I'm going to go to the local plan. I agree with your feelings about Capstone Park. 2 days ago, I took my client, who's a constituent of yours, by the way, because he lives in your area, and we walked to Capstone Park, walked around the lake, went to the cafe, which I will say is a very good for value cost. And the idea that there'll be anything encroaching on that quality of lifestyle, that tranquility, that does make me feel nervous. But would you agree that there has been either through literal ignorance, as in lack of knowledge, or deliberately, because they've got their own political angle, a scaremongering to try and give the impression that if an area is in a local plan, that somehow equals a green light. Now, as you pointed out, we do not have a state-run system. We are a country of the free market. And a company, a private company, rightly so, because we all promote the idea of free enterprise, can identify an area around Capstan Park. They know it's legitimate. They can apply for it. As you said yourself, you go to appeal. We waste a lot of money losing that appeal. So surely there's a case of trying to put that nonsense as politics on one side and getting out there and explaining to people that local plan is about protection. And are you hopeful that a relationship can happen, that where we can actually have real sense of guidance and management over our Medway with the private sector over these issues? Thank you, Chair.
Phew. I mean, can I just pick up on the issue around cars that you mentioned about the number? I mean, I completely agree. I mean, one of the things we have to be very conscious of is that we're not saying we're anti-car, but what was, I mean, I said this at the start. This is about how we manage the volume of traffic, which is already out, far too high. And one of the things that's really struck me, and there's a fantastic project in Rainham going called Medway Breathes Project. The number of young children at primary school who have to use inhalers is shocking. And the only reason that they're having to use inhalers is because their lungs are compromised because of the air pollution that they're having to breathe in every day. And if we don't do anything about that, then we are failing as an authority, and we're failing as a community for the next generation of people growing up here in Medway. So we have to act. We don't have a choice. So that's why we're doing what we can on the traffic issues and the transport issues, is because not doing anything isn't an option. So I just want to emphasize how strongly I feel about that. Just picking up your point about the development, particularly at Capstan. I mean, obviously, I know it's, I've worked there for a long time. And the development that's encroaching upon it is the East Hill site. We lost the public inquiry on that one. The work has begun. They started to build there already. They're clearing the site and stuff like that. And at the moment, it will encroach on the park, and that was a public inquiry that breaks my heart in many respects. However, if we are then to make sure that the rest of the development along that Capstan Valley doesn't go the same way, then it's about master planning and getting it right. One of the things we have put in the local plan is a green corridor, which runs all the way from the Darlin Banks, all the way down past Capstan and down towards Lidsing and out to the North Downs. That's the green corridor that we're arguing. We're arguing with Mason about how it runs through their bit, because it obviously goes into Mason. But that's really important to keep that biodiversity link in there and keep the park feeling like you're still in the countryside and stuff like that. We're looking at a similar arrangement in the Horstead Valley, where Barnfield is, in your own ward there, having that green corridor stretching all the way to the North Downs and preserving that, and that's in the plan as well. So there is that approach that we're having where we want to retain our sort of our countryside sites that are quite surrounded by development. At least they will retain that countryside feel, even though the development is increasing and it's encroaching to a certain extent. That's the reassurance I can give you on that, and that is part and parcel of what we're trying to achieve. Hopefully does that cover your point?
Thank you. Just one thing again, and thank you for bringing up the local plan. One thing I've been seeing online at the moment, actually, is that there seems to be a lot of confusion between some people around the local plan. The local plan has been proposed by Medway Council, and actually the local government reorganisation. Obviously, yesterday it was set out the Medway Council proposal for local government reform in Kent. I think it'd just be useful because, and obviously, you describe a meeting in Strood. I was at that meeting as a local councillor, and it was a shame, actually, a party that were due to be on this committee but aren't represented here tonight. Some of their representatives were very much, using local government reorganisation as a means of confusion around saying that because of local government reorganisation, we shouldn't have a local plan. It would be useful if you could set out, just for clarification for residents in Medway, how the local plan would work throughout. Apologies, colleagues, can we not talk whilst questions have been made? How actually a local plan would work with local government reorganisation.
Okay, happy to do that. And I just remember that Councillor Peake asked me about the link between a local plan and planning permission. I didn't answer that point of your apologies, so I'll just cover that point if I may. So within the local plan, the allocation of sites is on the maps, and you can see clearly where things are, whether it's an employment site, a retail site, or a housing site, or a new school. It's all there on the maps of the local plan. That means that there is a presumption in favour of development on that site for whatever it's allocated for, so long as it fulfils, and every site has got a policy statement on it about what's allowed and what works in that area. So long as that development fulfills the aims of that policy, then it will have a strong chance of being approved. However, notwithstanding the role of the planning committee, which is semi-judicial as they call it, that's the decision-making body that is legally set up to make decisions on planning, any planning application, whether it's in the local plan or not. So even though the local plan exists, that doesn't guarantee planning permission. That just means that there's a stronger chance of it happening. And that has to be the planning committee makes the decisions, and they meet monthly, I think, don't they, at the moment? So that's how it works. Just on that wider question then, about the link between LGR and local plans. I mean, obviously, we've seen a number of different iterations on LGR, and I'm not involved with that, thank goodness, because that's so stressful for those people who are involved in it. But obviously, I'm aware of the pictures that are being painted on how many authorities we might have in Kent, and the decision the government will make later this year, I think it's due. So I think, to make it very clear, if the local plan is adopted by the government next year, it's only in a draft form at the moment, all the Regulation 19 consultation stuff has come in. That is packaged up with the plan and all the supporting documents of the plan, sent to the Planning Inspectorate for consideration and approval at government level. If that is approved, and we'll hear some point next year, probably towards the end of next year, it takes about a year for them to process all this, we will then have our local plan in place. That is then the legal document that lives for this particular area for the next 15 years up to 2041. Equally, I know that Gravesham are in the very close to opening up their Reg 19 consultation at the moment, so that's coming through in the next month or two, I believe. Maidstone have already got their plan in place, which runs up for the next 15 years. I think it was adopted a couple of years ago, so that's running through at the moment. And obviously Swale are in the middle of producing theirs, but I don't know how far ahead they are. I think they're quite far behind on producing theirs. So the plans are at different stages for the different areas. When the areas come together, the policies within those plans remain. They can't be moved until a new plan has replaced it and been approved by the government to replace it. So once the new authority is in place, whatever it is, a North Kent Unitary Authority of whatever shape and size it happens to be, the new councillors and the new council authority that becomes can then make the decision either to live with the existing local plans until such time as they expire, or they can start producing. Now, I would imagine they'll start producing their own for the new authority. That will then take 2, 3, 4 years to produce. Then it will have to go off to the government as all through the stages again for approval, and then that will supersede any existing plans, but that will take years. And the good chance is that in the meanwhile, the existing local plans, including ours, will remain as the enforceable document for that period of time. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, and actually just a place of clarity, so obviously there's proposals that have been released by Medway Council show some areas, particularly Couchman and Halling, would not be in the same, potentially might not be in the same local authority as the rest of Medway. What would be the weight for proposals for those areas, depending on how that works?
Because if the plan is adopted next year, that becomes the legal planning guidance for those areas until a new plan comes into place. So that would remain for those areas, just within that boundary that they're within. The new authority, for wherever if they were to be moved to, say, a West Kent authority or a Mid Kent authority, whatever it happens to be, that authority may well then produce its own local plan for the new authority and adopt that and take them in, and that would then supersede. It's similar to the way that the sort of layering of plans. I mean, we've got our 2003 plan, which is still in place, The policies were ran out of steam decades ago, but actually it's the only plan we have. So we have been using that as guidance. Once we get our new local plan in place, that takes precedence over that. It's the new legal document as approved by government. It takes the government to approve the local plan, not the local authority, and that's where the legal side kicks in. Is that okay? Is that
Thank you. I think that's useful to clarify that. I've got Councillor Shoker, then Councillor Williams, Kemp and Doe, and then I suspect we'll probably be at the end of this. So I call Councillor Shoker.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not sure if you already provided this information to the committee at a different stage. So it was basically around the measurable progress that we've made towards the 2015 net zero target since the action plan. I'm also going to add, there may be a couple of Fruit Loops within this committee who don't believe in the impacts of human impacts to climate change, so you probably won't need to share it with them.
in terms...
Clarify on that, or no?
No, that's fine. I quite like Fruit Loops.
It's good to see you, Councillor Shoker. Yeah, please clarify. Please clarify your point. I thought this was a non-political...
Councillor Curry, let's
I think the question was
answer this
directed
one.
to me, and I'm quite happy with that. Thank you very much. I think that as far as the targets are there in the Climate Change Action Plan, and the new Climate Change Action Plan, refreshed, comes to Cabinet in 2 weeks' time, so it's very exciting. I've got a copy of it here, so I could give you some figures if you like, but perhaps I'll do my best.
No,
it might be better.
It's better to send them out.
They're in there, and it'll get published in the next couple of weeks. It's published next week with the papers, so you'll see the figures in there. So it's quite exciting. I think one of the things you have to be very clear of, and I think this is something that I do mention quite a few times, that our climate action plan has 2 parts to it. One of them is how do we, as an organisation, as Medway Council, do our bit for the climate, and how do we reduce our climate footprint. So one of the things obviously is introducing electric vehicles, which we've been doing. One of the other things is the waste fleet, for example. That isn't electric, but it's actually massively better than the old waste fleet, and has reduced our tonnage of carbon into the atmosphere quite significantly as a result. And equally in terms of how we use our buildings. So we've got retrofit programs for our buildings, and if you look at the Cossington building, for example, the new Splashes as it was, that's got solar panels all over it, and it's fantastic, and it's got quite a small carbon footprint. And plans for Gun Wharf, similarly, as the refurbishment of Gun Wharf comes through, that will be. So we're doing our bit internally, and we're also making it very aware for all our staff that they need to do their bit, and they report back to our climate team on what they're doing and how they're achieving different things. So that's our internal operation. But the much wider, I think Medway accounts for probably, it's not quite as much as 10% of Medway's carbon output, but we're sort of between 0 and 10% of Medway's carbon output comes from the council operation. The rest of it comes from the community. So how do we work with the community and get them to do their bit? Well, actually, it's really quite easy. There's an open door. So many people now are passionate about this, want to do their best, whether it's schools, whether it's the hospital. We've got all sorts of activities going on to show and demonstrate how people, the community of Medway, can reduce their carbon footprint. And we've got that in 2 ways. In the Climate Action Plan, one of our we've got 5 priorities. The number 1 priority is knowledge and engagement. And that's giving out that information to the general public and to our communities on what they can be doing. And we do that all the time. We ran a big green business event just recently, which we had over 100 businesses engaged with that. It's a fantastic event. And a lot of them are really keen to do what they can and already are. So we're engaging with the business community. We do a lot of other public engagement activities across the piece. And what we've done, which is proving extremely successful, we set up our community working group. The community working group has representatives from the NHS, from the schools, from the universities, from the army, all sorts of organisations, MVA, the big voluntary organisation from Medway, they're on that community working group, and things like the eco hubs are there as well and stuff like that. And they have massive social media networks. So everything we produce on climate stuff and reducing the footprint gets through the community working group and into the community really well. So we're doing what we can. There's always a long way to go, but yeah, that's the kind of messaging that we're getting out there.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for the report. We spoke about electric vehicles earlier on, buses and vans you're talking about. I see we replaced our fleet with Euro 6 diesel engines. Just wonder what the thoughts behind that were, because have you got aspirations for in the future to be all electric, or are we still going to stay with the diesels? Because we seem to be, going the all-electric way. Is there not the technology there, or is it just cost at the moment?
That's a really, really good question, actually, because it's part of the dream would be to electrify. I mean, I know a lot of London boroughs have gone electric with their waste fleets and stuff like that, and others have as well. The problem we face is power supply, really. That's the real massive issue. And it was quite a difficult decision we made to go down this route, because it wasn't cheap. It's millions of pounds we've been spending on these new vehicles, but we felt actually it was worth going down the Euro 6 route, on those, in order to really take us on that journey as part of our waste improvement plan towards decarbonising how we operate, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a moment if you like. So we had to make that kind of key decision. Do we wait until we can find somewhere to put the vehicles with a power supply? And we've no idea how long that takes. The Pier Road site, where the vehicles are stored and maintained and stuff like that, there is no electricity enough there to do that charging of electric vehicles. So we need a new depot. And that's in the waste improvement plan, is to find a new depot. There's a couple of sites we've got in mind. They are proving extremely difficult to talk to the landowners and say how about it. We're also very conscious that LGR is only 3 years down the road, possibly, and we know that Swale and Gravesham and whoever else we may end up becoming a unitary with have also got depots as well. And for the much larger unitary, we'll probably need more than one depot. In fact, I'm sure we will. We'll need probably 3 depots for the whole of the whatever size unitary it happens to be when the time comes. So we're conscious that the depot issue is fundamental, and any new depot will have charging in, and then we can start replacing with electric vehicles. The nice thing about the vehicles that we've got, whilst the engines are a Euro 6 diesel, so they are pretty much the same as a car, really, rather than all the operation of them is electric. So the machinery that operates the lifting stuff at the back and the compressing stuff at the back, everything, that's all electric, and they've got cameras on them and things like that. So they're a much quieter vehicle, and we've had that comments from the general public saying they haven't heard the waste vehicle go by because the machinery is so much quieter than it was. So there is a plus there. So I think we are in that place where we've moved from sort of all diesel and badly polluting diesel with old vehicles that were breaking down on us every month. It was costing us about £30,000 a month on repairs, to saving that money on repairs by replacing the fleet, going down that route towards having them as zero carbon vehicles. And the nice thing is as well that these engines can take biofuel. So we've been looking at the biofuel option for them, and as soon as it becomes commercially viable to do that, because at the moment I think the price per litre on diesel is better than it is on biofuel, but that's probably going to change as more biofuel becomes available. Then we'll be able to use biofuel in them, and as soon as we can, we'll do that. But obviously that's a cost implication there as well. Biofuel isn't perfect, it's not totally carbon neutral, but it's a lot better than diesel. So we're heading in that's taking us on in that direction towards decarbonising our operation, if you like. And just on that note, one thing that I know that our government is very keen on is this process of decarbonising the urban areas. So they're engaging with key urban centres across the country, in London, Glasgow, Leeds, Bristol, all there. They've engaged with us here in Medway, and they've talked to us about it, and we've got more conversations to come about how they can support us in decarbonising our urban areas. So there's a big push towards that, generally speaking, as well. Hopefully that covers your point.
Yeah, so it's down to electrical supply where we are at the moment. Looking to the future, have we actually got the electrical supply from the suppliers to cover all going electric? Everybody goes electric. We have got some problems with electric supply in some parts of the borough. And I just wondered, you know, can they actually generate enough electricity for everything to go electric? That's just...
I'm gonna say yes. Yeah, I know. I'm going to say yes, and the reason I can say yes to that is for a number of reasons. Obviously, we don't have it at the moment, but if you look at where our key, for transport generally, obviously the electrical, the railway network's all electric, primarily, certainly is in the southeast, and so therefore there is a big supply of electricity for them. The big factor in London is a problem, oversupply for electric buses in London and stuff like that, and it is for here in Medway. But what I would say is that and I've been looking at this, I can't give you chapter and verse because I'm not a great one for how financial investment markets work, but the sheer number of big companies like Aviva and L&G and that who are investing huge amounts of money into delivering the government's ambition on the Great British Energy Company and on how we become completely free from the gas and oil companies, which would be fantastic, get ourselves free from that throttle that they've had around us for 100 years or whatever. That would be fantastic. And break free of that and produce our own electricity with wind and solar and wave and all the other options that we've got. That process is well underway now, and the investment companies from the City of London are engaged with it in a massive way. So I would say yes, there is, because the funding is now starting to come through in significant amounts of it. And honestly, those companies would never invest if they didn't see a future in it. They're not stupid. They're investment companies. That's their job. And so if they're engaging, then I think the future is really good. And one example of that is in our housing development. And the number of the large development companies, and I've been up to Salford to see what they're doing there at the University of Salford, with the number of homes that are now completely carbon neutral and running off. Now they've got them up there, and Berkeley Homes, and I think Wimp is another one who built gas-free houses. We've had some gas-free woods, and there's more to come. So moving away from those gas and oil companies is now already well underway across the country, and we'll see it here as well, I'm sure. I'm being optimistic.
Yeah, I just had reservations about the supply as every people takes it up and that, you know. And I'd love to see solar panels on every roof of the house. As you know, I'm quite into solar myself. The other question was, we spoke about the waste improvement plan, and I said there was 100,000 tonnes of waste transferred, recycled or recovered annually. It had 1.6 went to landfill. I just wondered whereabouts that is actually taken to and the cost to the council.
I'm not sure about the location of the landfill sites on that one. I have to come back to you on that, but I didn't think we were taking any. Yeah, is it? Apologies if you want to come in.
Sorry. I'd have to come up and check that where it's going, to be honest with you. What I can say is they do everything possible, and Councillor Curry recently went on a visit to Viola's treatment site, absolutely everything possible to pick out as much as they absolutely possibly can that can be recycled. So when people are putting recyclable materials in with their refuse, which unfortunately happens a lot, the majority of that comes out. So what is actually going to landfill, or to be disposed of and not recycled, you just cannot recycle. You cannot do anything with.
We've actually got the lowest level of sending stuff to landfill in the country. There was a report to this committee, I think it was last one or the one before. So actually we can be very proud of that record. I think the target is 13% and ours is 1.3%. Yeah. It's a really good number.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's not a huge amount. And so we'll come back with the figure on that exactly and help you with that one. I think that the one of the things to note on that is the amount that's going to waste to energy. Now, that's a huge problem partly because waste to energy is not ideal. It is a pollution that we're trying to avoid. That's the black sack waste that we've got to sort out. So the waste strategy is addressing that. But also we've got this massive incentive to sort that out because of the new taxation that's coming through. Is going to cost us a huge amount every year if we don't sort it out. So we've only got a short period of time before that kicks in, and we will be paying an enormous amount of carbon tax on that if we don't. So it's another big incentive to have that going. The answer is about reduce, reuse, recycle. As the old mantra I go back to all the time. How do we get people to throw away less? How do we get the manufacturers to produce less stuff that's just thrown away? And then how do we manage to recycle it at the same time as well? So there is a lot to do, and that's why we need the strategy.
Yeah, thanks for that, Simon. I just want to like to make a comment. We spoke about, it's not a question really, it's a comment, about Caxton Park and loss of green spaces and green belt. I spoke to quite a few local residents, and they are concerned about the tract of land behind Brompton Farm Road, the green belt, being on the actual local plan. They're a bit concerned about that. And disappointed it's on there actually, because we've actually had in the past we've actually had planning applications refused for that plot of land. So it's just a comment on that really, just something to think of.
Okay, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Kemp. Okay, so that's that. Okay, I was going to say that then therefore the last contribution, I think we will take a short break afterwards. For this is from Councillor Doe.
Thank you. Well, I just really want to ask you on a number of points, but I'll go through them briefly. First of all, on frontline services, I have noticed in my ward work, and indeed this is not something that's come up overnight, but I think it's something we perhaps need to look at, is the actual mismatch between the public's expectations of both the planning service and the tree service, which actually they just feel that the council's just not doing it. You know, when they want enforcement, they can't get the right sort of people there. It's very, and I do appreciate the reason for this is the sheer, well, often sheer lack of staffing in those departments. But I think what I would like to see really is some way of actually setting standards. For example, if I complain about a tree as a member of the, when am I going to get that dealt with within a particular period? And I just wondered whether we could look at standards and also look at in a sense, it's almost like a contract with the public in the sense that we will do it within X days, weeks, whatever it is, and so on. So we give them a much better handle on the subjects that they, you know, on planning trees, which are the two things really I find my ward anyway occupy more time than anything else. And I think that you know, because of this mismatch, I think we need to get the public to have a much greater understanding. We do that by having, perhaps, I don't know whether you can have a review of that service level, and whether we can actually get those expectations into a document, which we can then say, these are the expectations. You know, you haven't had it in 3 days. You're not meant to have it in 3 days. Can't do that, you know. But I think that otherwise, what tends to happen is that it's a sort of situation where those that shout loudest, you know, will probably get more service than those that don't. And it just seems to me that there's an area there we could improve our performance. And I wonder if you'd be good enough to take a look at that.
Absolutely, I don't disagree with you at all there. And I think that's kind of where we are in many respects. I've talked about how you mentioned specifically around the tree issue and bringing together the various threads of the way the green space services is now all under one directorate control. That's going to help a lot because obviously the staff are all working as part of the same team. One of the issues within the middle of that is the role of Medway North. And you're as familiar with how they operate as I am, yeah. Obviously, because one of the things we made a decision to do, certainly over the last year, Medway North have been in operation for 13 years, if I remember correctly, and any council operator like that needs to be looked at in detail certainly after that length of time about effectiveness and the two sort of mantras that are in my head on that, which is value for money and quality of service. And we have found that areas of Medway North do need looking at in a lot more detail. So you may have noted from the way we've set up the new cabinet subcommittees to look to act as the shareholder boards for our various LATCO companies, that we've got the Medway North one. We've got a new sort of oversight structure in there with a new liaison board that we've set up to look at this very issue, particularly in a number of different areas, and I'm actually going to be chairing that liaison board and taking a much more sort of personal control with that, along with two of my councillor colleagues as well. So we're going to have a much closer scrutiny going on with the delivery from Medway North.
Okay, and if we couple that with those publicly announced standards, then I think we'd be able to manage expectations a lot more, and perhaps even save money ourselves in you know, fielding angry calls from the public who are not getting the service that they understand, which I think is quite a lot of that. If I can move on, please, to the question of the local plan. We obviously had a discussion on quite a discussion in the special council meeting on the subject, and I don't want to rerun that. But the one thing which I did wonder we could probably do, as if you like, in agreement with all the councillors really, is we've got a local plan which is shaped very much by demands made on us, if you like, by other people, you know, and housing and so forth, and also on our desire to make sure that we get the best for our citizens. But the thing that really worries me is the question of the infrastructure parts that we don't control. And I wondered if we've ever said to those people, and I have no background on this, but whether we've actually said, look, this is our local plan, how can you function in relation to that local plan? For example, the obvious one is things like GPs. You know, we are going to put 20,000 people there and 10,000 people there according to the local plan. Now, what does that actually say? Can you deal with that? Because I think it's very important that we don't get the inspector making a decision which seems reasonable on the basis of the plan, but all the rest of the infrastructure, you know, things like electricity, which we've alluded to before, you know, the things like, for example, water problems, which we've got with Southern Water in quite a big way, the disposal of that. And also, of course, on the wider health units as to, you know, and whether in fact we know that gas and electricity, people are expressing their concerns about the level of demand. Now, all I would like to do is to actually have that put in front of those people, so that when we put our plan in, or even when we have it, before we have it considered, if you like, we've got statements from those statutory people that may say, yes, we can accommodate this, but this is going to cost you 50 million. Because, you know, I think that's the risk of it. We get a plan that's quite undeliverable in reality, because actually none of those services has got the investment, because nobody really realises that that's what they need. And I think that's, you know, we need to have that iteration, if I put it that way. And I wondered if something could be done along those lines, simply saying, here's our local plan, we've done it, can we give you a month to come back to us and give us the what costs, if you like, of what you think is going to be needed, for example, in the case of health, both at local level, primary health, and secondary health, and so on. And if I had that, I would feel much happier with the local plan, or unhappy, but I think at least you're putting a package that's viable to the government if they make that particular investment. And I think that's where the thing is so weak. And I'm not saying ours is weak, I'm saying the system is weak. So I'd like to make a point. On the question of transport, I think we've quoted the fact that you know, you're keen to get people from cars to buses, but actually I do think that we need to be much more. There are lots of different solutions adopted all over different parts of the world and different parts of the country, and we are suffering because whereas somewhere like Manchester has got its railways right in the middle, and it's been developed around the railways, if you like. Our rail network runs by the side of the river virtually, if you like, and down there, that part. But actually whole areas are miles away from the railway, and you know, miles away from other places as well. And I think whereas, you know, the answer, of course, is just jump in the tube. I wouldn't bother with a car if I lived in London, because, you know, you can jump in the tube any time and it's very easy. But I think that's the real reason why that there isn't an easy thing. You know, the people who live, for example, if I take Hempstead, for instance, people who live in Hempstead High Street can't just nip into the Hempstead and hope the bus is going to be there. The reality is that if, for example, they want to come here, it's going to take them quite a long time on public transport to do it. And I think that's a real drawback to it. And I think that, what I would like to see, I think we need to make sure that we examine solutions not just simply around, how London does it, but how actually someone of our size with our particular two problems. One is obviously hills, but that's not unique. The other one is a river, and that's not unique either. And I think that, if we could actually look at how those problems have been solved elsewhere, I think, there may be a larger role for buses. I accept that. I think, and maybe, there are other things as well, like, dial a ride and those sort of things which can be brought in. But I think simply going into, saying, well, the only alternative is to have more buses, I don't think that's going to cut it. I really don't believe that will solve it, certainly not on its own. I think we have to, the idea, I think, that, you make life even more impossible for cars, and then then people are forced to go and do it. I think actually there'd be much more support if there is a stand of infrastructure. For example, we know we've got the Elizabeth line, which doesn't come to this area, that joins right into the infrastructure and so forth, So, I don't know whether this is being considered, but I think when we come to do that transport work and the bus strategy, I just don't think we should just say, well, buses and that's it. I'm sure there are other things. And we also need to remember that part of what we have is a lot of pollution coming from the motorway itself, which of course is mainly caused by very heavy lorries. If you go up, for example, to where in my ward, where you go up to Farthing Corner, for instance, you'll find loads and loads of lorries there overnight, dozens of them. And they are polluting the atmosphere because we don't use the railways in the proper way. So I think that it would be very useful to have that. And I think that the other thing I wanted to ask you, and I'll be final on this, sorry to really, on community services, which are responsible, I wonder if we had a system, as you know, and I think you were very much in favour of this, as I was, which was to bring, turn those libraries into community hubs, so people had local services, local frontline service access. Now, I don't know whether that is now a complete casualty of our financial situation, or whether we intend to do more to make those. But I wonder, from your point of view of frontline services, I think people do need those services much nearer to them. The feeling that the council is so remote from them, and particularly it'll be even more remote when we have strategic authorities, And I just wondered whether we want to continue with that programme, whether we're able to, and if so, what that programme is. So I wondered if you can look into that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm trying to pick out the points there that I could probably contribute to that. But I appreciate all the points you made, and obviously you're highlighting a lot of the issues that we're aware of, and that we have to, they are not simple, they're knotty problems, and they're complex problems that we're trying to solve. As far as the infrastructure, you talked about particularly health and stuff like that. Obviously, I think I said a bit earlier that as part of the delivery of the local plan, we've already set up the officer working group. In fact, we've got a couple of groups in place now. One is on the infrastructure delivery plan itself, and that's sort of the bones of that are now coming together in order to make that work. And it's something that will go on for the whole lifespan of the plan. That infrastructure is always going to be needed, and I think you mentioned the word that this is an iterative process. It really is. Times change over the years, and we'll have to look at how we do things differently as things move on and change. So it has to be that kind of constantly managed process of delivering infrastructure. ICB and the health stuff, it's not an easy issue. It's very hard work, as you're aware, on how we work closely with the health authorities to get the right facilities in place. It's in the mix. It's part of the discussion. I know our health teams and our public health teams are working really hard on doing what we can in that area, but it will be difficult and it's challenging. And then equally, in terms of the utilities, we met with the utility companies a lot. We still do. It's part of that delivery mechanism that you don't build a housing estate until it's got sewage and water going into it and electricity and the rest of it, that kind of approach. Yeah. Well, that has actually taken place. So obviously they've seen the plans over the years that we've been producing this, and they've said they can do it. I mean, that's why we put the allocations in, and that's neat. So we have confidence that they can do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to take the plan forward. It wouldn't be sustainable. So the answer to that question is it's a constant conversation, and the answer is at the moment it's looking okay and positive, and it's going forward. I think in terms of, just to mention very briefly equally about the way we've approached this is very inclusive approach to it. So we've been meeting with developers as well. We've had developers forum meetings last year, we had another one this year, very popular. They all come along to it, and we talk about how we deliver all the infrastructure around the new developments as well. So the big development companies and the small ones, we've been bringing them into the same room together to talk to them about this as well. So, and that's been very positive. I think just moving on from that infrastructure approach, you talked about transport in particular. I will mention trams. I know that it was mentioned a bit earlier. I love trams. We found there is some tram issues that we could possibly bring forward. There are things called trackless trams now, which are operating in other countries, which are a lot less. They don't require all the rail network that go, and stuff like that. And they're computer-based and stuff like that, so they work, and they're a lot cheaper to deliver. So we could certainly be looking at that. And I agree with you. The answer doesn't just lie with buses. It's that whole active travel, integrated travel approach that we've got to employ. And we're on the beginning of quite a long journey, if you pardon the pun again, on how that works. But the local transport plan, which we publish next summer, will have all that detail in. And it covers everything from hospital transport right through to schools and how we get children back and forth, because a lot of the schools transport isn't sustainable either at the moment. So we've got to look at all those issues around how we move people around Medway and stuff like that. So that's going in, and as I say, the consultation on that is about to begin. We've just approved the plan for that, so please feed into that as much as you can. I call on all the groups to do that as much as they can. Just on the last thing you mentioned there about hubs, I'm a big fan of hubs. I think they're really important. I know it's something that the council is looking at. It's outside of my area, but certainly I've been involved in some conversations around that and how we communicate with our communities. That's a really key way, giving people somewhere. A lot of people, although most of us live and die by phones nowadays, people don't. They like to talk face to face and stuff like that. So the future of hubs, it's difficult to get them in place. It requires quite a lot of sort of juggling around of investments. I think Gillingham and Chatham in particular, but that's certainly part of our thinking.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for engaging with us in depth. I'm going to pass over to Councillor Cook for a proposal, please.
Thank you. So as well as the committee being asked to note the report, I've got 3 actions. We had a conversation about the detail of examples of the impact of building on local communities, and I think the specific action was the specific request for detail of the spend of Section 106 money from Gibraltar Farm, if I've got that.
It's just some examples of where we've mitigated the impact on local communities from large-scale building. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, thank you. So if I put that in my first section, the further detail and examples of the way that we've mitigated the impact on local communities. Thank you. Secondly, we were asked for the figure of the cost of managing and emptying the bin, particularly we spoke about dog bin, combined bins. And thirdly, the specific question around the location of landfill waste. I believe I've got them all.
I did also ask about the, and I think we reached agreement, about the question of standards within planning enforcement and trees. So we have a complete, so actually we say to the public, these are the standards after we've worked a review through, and that's what we can deliver on, because at the moment we don't manage the expectations of the public well enough.
Thank you. Chair, how do you want to proceed with that?
Maybe if we just draft them and then forward it to you, Councillor Doe.
Maybe we can just have a note on the existing service level agreements once an issue's being reported about a tree, how it comes back. I think that might work.
I think that's a sensible suggestion. Okay, with that, do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Is that agreed? Okay, I'm going to take a short break, so we'll return at 20 past to discuss the housing allocations. And thank you, Councillor Curry, for as ever, for your thorough attendance. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone. The next item is the Housing Allocation Policy Review 2025. So I'm going to ask Bex Wilcox to introduce this item, please.
This is what will be the new allocations policy. So it's a statutory requirement under the Housing Act 1996 that all local authorities have an allocations policy on how we allocate all social housing properties within the locality of that local authority. So obviously, we're asking you to consider the paper and some of the proposals that we've made. So the proposals have been in conjunction with consultation, so with stakeholders, both internal and external, elected members, other officers within housing services, public health, adult and children's social care, and a selection of our council tenants as well via our tenants panel. It's also been out to public consultation, and we used a variety of methods to do that public consultation. So this is still draft because it won't have included the outcomes of the public consultation. It has completed a diversity impact assessment and potential risks, but I particularly wanted to highlight the Appendix 1, which shows you a summary of the main proposed changes that we have looked for in this allocations policy. So our current allocations policy was from 2019. So there's been significant challenges in the housing sector and a pandemic since we last did our allocations policy. So some of the key things I want to draw your attention to is that we've reduced savings and investments. However, we have increased household income, and we've set it per bedroom size. So previously it was a blanket policy. Sorry, should I pull that? Sorry, is that better? Sorry, beg your pardon. So previously it was a blanket rule for household income at 50,000. We've now set it, we're proposing to set it per bedroom need rather than a blanket policy, which would mean that if you require the larger units, you'll have a slightly higher income threshold than you would do with a lower number of units. We're also proposing to increase the amount of time you've lived in the borough by 100%. So this is for 3 years. Through the consultation prior to going out to public, it was anywhere from 2 years to 5 years. And so we've taken the decision for 3 years. So it's a slight increase, but it's not a huge increase up to the 5 years that one of the proposals are. There are exceptions, and the exceptions are highlighted in there. So there's some banding changes as well. They'll remain sort of Band A, which is critical, and then Band B, which is urgent housing need, Band C is significant housing need, and Band D is considered to have a housing need. There's no, what we're also, key areas that we're going to do is we're going to remove the transfer banding. And we're also going to remove Band X, which is our inactive register, which currently sits at 6,000 applications that we have to manage as an inactive register. And these are people that are not eligible for our housing waiting list. So we're going to remove that inactive register. I think some of the key things around Band B is particularly around care leavers. So previously there was no specific band, and there's also some legislative change around care leavers. So this will be Medway care leavers will get a Band B, and all other care leavers who are eligible will get a Band C. There are no additions to Band A, and there's no new additions to Band D. There's just some combinations within Band B. We're also looking to propose to change the community contribution, which currently is 6 months' worth of evidence, to 3 years' worth of evidence. And then there's some discussions around medical priority going forward.
Thank you for that introduction. Very important policy here, and I'm glad that it's been discussed at this scrutiny. Are there any members who want to speak in this debate? Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Bex. I'm so delighted to see the care leavers thing changed. And I know because we have talked several times about my constituent who was in the same situation. This is exactly the right thing to do. Care leavers are care leavers. It doesn't matter whether Medway care leavers. I mean, the whole practice of placing young people outside of their home boroughs, the whole thing is questionable anyway. And then to disadvantage them in housing because they're not, this is not their home, it makes no sense. So it's really great to see that. Also very positive to see the changes in terms of the income level and savings. That also, I think, yeah, it was quite out of date, so it's really great to see that. I have a couple of questions about, now this is really tough, I know, because you can't meet the needs. The needs are ever increasing and ever growing, and it's a very limited stock of housing. So I get that, but I guess I do have to raise the point that there's a few things where I'm unclear how just or balanced it is. So for example, if somebody owns a property with their partner and then they suffer domestic violence and then they have to flee, but then they're still part owners of that property, does that then prejudice their housing banding or if they qualify, if you know what I mean? So I own a property with my partner and I'm part owner, but then I have to flee because of domestic violence. Do I then get to go on the housing register? Would I qualify?
So to start with, that would normally be looked at under the homelessness legislation.
Right,
if someone was
okay.
fleeing and required to leave that property, the likelihood is they would flee, approach the local authority under the homeless legislation rather than under the allocations legislation.
Okay.
So the homelessness decision would be made on that, and then from that a decision would be made regarding how we would support that individual.
Okay, thank you. Because I just thought it won't be fair to disadvantage them because they have that ownership, because if you flee such a situation, you're not in a position to even dispose of that, that ownership. And in terms of the banding system, it is a bit technical, and I'm not sure I understand all the kind of different scenarios in which they all kick in, but there's a preference list, isn't it? So people on Band A, their needs are much higher, so they get sort of first dibs on the stuff that comes through. Not the best way to describe it, but you know what I mean, first right of refusal. So then, say if somebody's been on lower bands, Band B, for a lot longer than someone who's come in on Band A, for that person who's languishing on Band B, if you like, they're never going to get those kind of houses that are properties that are coming up on Band A, that they're always going to get almost properties that may not be the most desirable. And then I think by the time you move down to the lower bands, then do you see what I'm not really explaining this very well. It's just as that preference list kind of progresses, you then have people on the lowest bands who are always left with what is not suitable for anyone else, and then they kind of just have to make do with it, and then they're there for a long time. Mike.
So, Councillor Doe, could you come through the chair and could you turn your mic on?
If you've got people in Band A that are in need, I can see what you mean, that if you're stuck in Band B, you would get fed up. Obviously, you know, take it by the that's the reality.
Which I predicated what I said with that. I understand that. I predicated what I said with that very statement, Councillor Doe. I understand that. It is, however, our job to scrutinize and to try and ask these questions to see if there are any things there that can be. So I'd be very interested to hear the officers' views on that. Thank you.
Okay, so Band A is very, very specific. It's our smallest band out of all the bands that we have. And most of our Band A applicants are for medical need. So if the property is suitable, so it's an existing property that's got adaptations, that would always be given priority to someone with a need for those adaptations, and the likelihood is that's going to be a Band A.
Right.
So with Band A, it's primarily very high urgent medical cases. something to say that the household member is housebound because they need adaptations. That would be an example of a band A. Armed forces, band A. Social care referrals, particularly regarding children, band A. And another example is major works or demolition. So that's a priority move because either the property is not suitable, i.e. it's not habitable, and there's very, very tight criteria on that, or the property's earmarked for demolition, so therefore that tenant is required to decant. So it's a very, very small percentage of our housing register that's in a band A, and they normally require that need as an urgent need or a specific property requirement. Yeah. Most of our allocations go to band B and band C, and I will happily provide that information. I don't have it to hand tonight, but I will provide you with that information. So most allocations go to band B and band C.
Thank you. And I was going to say, then band D, that like they then don't get that much of choice at all. I mean, I understand that if your need, I'm not saying it's entirely the wrong approach. I'm just saying, I have constituents who have contacted me saying that we've just been on the waiting list for so long and we just don't get properties to bid on that are suitable because of what band we are on. So I just want to understand what I can say to them. I obviously tell them it's a difficult issue, there's not enough, housing stock, there's a rising need, I understand that, but I do have to advocate for them.
So one of the main reasons to some of the changes is that we're proposing a change for transfers. So this is existing social housing tenants that don't have any other need. So an example being, it might be somebody in a 2-bedroom property that wants to move to another 2-bedroom property. Okay, so this is somebody that's already an existing social housing tenant who's already in a property that meets their need, and therefore potentially they're taking a property that somebody perhaps is in temporary accommodation or is in a property that's not suitable going through. So to cover that, those transfers, we have something called a mutual exchange. As a local authority, we pay for a mutual exchange product that matches, so it's very easy to use, and that's part of our ongoing campaign with existing tenants, both ours and all our registered providers, about how we can promote mutual exchanges. So that should alleviate some of the stress on the waiting list. And also with Band D, the Band D applicants are those that have not owed a full homelessness duty. So these will be applicants that are either in prevention or relief duty, or have got rent arrears. Again, there's some discretion around rent arrears. And that's the two main reasons in Band D. So most people on the waiting list under this allocations policy will be sitting in Band B and Band C. And then it's done on date. Preference from that. And with most things, because of the way it's now, we've had home choice for a really long amount of time now, it's people's preference. So if somebody wants to move but only wants to stay in Twiddle and they're only bidding for 2 bedrooms in Twiddle, it's going to take them longer than if they're bidding for every single 2-bedroom property that is available to them. So, but that's part of choice. That's the new way of allocations. Previously, you just used to sit on a list and the local authority would just say, property and who? You're top of the list, that's your property, whereas now preference is involved and quite rightfully preference is involved. So that can alter it as well. So if somebody wants to move, the more property, say 2-bedroom properties, most popular properties along with 1-beds, they bid. As well. And if they're waiting for our larger properties, because we have such a small amount of those, so you're waiting 3+ years for a 4, 5 or 6-bedroom property. We had no 5 bedrooms last year come available on home choice.
Thank you for explaining that. Actually, that makes a lot of sense, and it kind of helps me understand it better. Also, I think there is an incentive if you are working to get a higher band. Did I understand that correctly? As in, if you go up a band?
As community contribution.
Okay.
So what we're proposing in the draft allocations is at the moment it's 6 months, and then you get a Band B. What we're proposing now is that we require 3 years, 3 years of evidence that you've continuously contributed to the community to retain your Band B. So it's that ongoing encouragement to stay within that band.
but the contribution to community is employment, or are there other
Oh,
things?
there's employment, there's a various numbers of things, and also it's not just employment, so
Okay.
that it's care responsibilities and stuff like that. There's a number of things.
Sure.
It's not just so it could be employment, it could be voluntary, your caring responsibilities. That's all taken into consideration because we're acutely aware that you may not be able to work due to medical reasons, or that you're a full-time carer. So
Thank you.
That's all in there.
Very reassuring. That's what I was trying to get at, because there might be genuine reasons why people can't work, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged.
Yes, no, they won't be.
That's really good. And the final thing I just wanted to say is, and I know you're already doing that, but I think there's a need for really joined up support for people who are in that on the housing register. So someone just contacted me to say, oh, I've been placed in temporary accommodation. I'm waiting for things, but meanwhile, I don't have proof of address and I'm stuck at various points. So I just thought, see, I wouldn't have even thought of that kind of support needed. And yeah, so I think there are many services involved. So I think you're already doing this from everything I can see, but I just wanted to raise the fact that to support people on the housing needs register, you really need to speak across departments and across sort of different service areas to make sure there's that joined up support for those people. But yeah, well done. This is a really tough balance to hit, so thank you for explaining all that. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Shukar.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question's around the allocation policy. So there's been an increase from 2 to 3 years on the requirement. Sorry. So the residency requirements increased to 2 to 3 years. So we acknowledge obviously the exceptions within this, but why do you feel these exceptions go far enough? How many people will be affected with the increase, with the change in the number of years? So without obviously I feel without a robust needs-based allocation with the exceptions, vulnerable groups are going to be at risks. They're obviously going to be pushed in the private market, forced to wait longer, potentially widening the gap between communities and deprivation and injustice. So, yeah, so that's basically my question on that point, and I've got another one, but if you could answer that, okay. What is the...
So the current allocations policy is that you have to be required to be resident in Medway for 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
So when we've been doing our consultation, there was a significant push for 5 years residency. And we felt when we looked through all the consultation responses that 3 years was more appropriate. So the 3 years, it's to ensure that people have got residency and are committed to residing in Medway, therefore, you know, when they get allocated, but also taking into consideration that 5 years is a significant amount of time. On average, somebody's waiting 14 months in temporary accommodation, for example, before they get moved into some form of settled accommodation. On average, most people are waiting at least 18 months to be allocated a social housing unit. So the time to reside in the borough is to ensure that we are allocating properties to those in most need. There are exceptions, and those exceptions capture those most vulnerable in our communities.
So do you feel the exemptions that you've kind of captured meet all the exemptions, including
Yes.
those that are not within, who are vulnerable, not in that exemption group?
Yes, unless you've got an example of who you think we may have excluded from that vulnerability group.
So you could look at people who are deprived, moving from borough to borough for various reasons and are in a vulnerable group but not included within the ones exceptions you've made. It's not like a needs-based. It's pretty much you've just subscribed a group of exemptions, but there's not any movement in between it for people who don't fit that.
Yeah.
So I think we always have to be careful of not fettering our discretion, essentially. So there'll always be an element of the policy that allows scope for individual decision making, essentially. So we have to be transparent and say this is what we think is the criteria, and that criteria will be broadly based on, you know, kind of best practice across the sector, you know, the legislation and all those things, that there will be those individual cases that need a special view, a different view potentially based on those circumstances. So that's kind of how we would deal with things that perhaps aren't explicit in the allocations policy. This is part of our kind of consultation. So if you think that there are any groups that we are missing or are, you know, we may be disadvantaging, then tell us, and we're more than happy to consider that in respect of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. My second question, I wasn't really going to ask this, but I just kind of looked over it. In terms of the cut-offs, will this not disproportionately affect those, with a rigid threshold like this, won't it disproportionately affect those who have more of a discriminatory effect for those who correlate with age, ethnicity, and family structures in certain areas by having more of a rigid kind of approach to your changes in bands? Have you looked into how it could impact those?
Yes, so there is a DPIA attached to the report that shows that we've looked through the different groups. When you mean the restrictions, which bit in particular reference, are you talking about the time frame in order before you're eligible on the waiting list, or do you mean specifically how we've set out the banding?
The banding.
So the banding is done on need. It's done on need and the need base of that particular individual that's applying for it. So the band A is the most urgent and dire need to move. Band B is urgent and so forth and so forth. So the lower down the banding, it's not lower priority, but the higher need. So the more needs you have for housing, the higher the banding you are.
Yeah, I might come back to you on this one.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Kemp.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you're here tonight, Bex. It saves me writing you an email. I've had a resident come to me the day before yesterday. She's in a private rented house. She's on multiple benefits. Her husband is on the minimum wage and she doesn't work. And the rent has now been increased by 200% at a stroke. She tried to get onto the waiting list, and she was told there's no chance of getting on because, in her words, immigrants get more priority. Now, I know that residents do tend to over-egg the case when they come and see you, so I just really wanted to check the veracity of that statement.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure you can liaise with.
Yeah, so I was going to say that a particular case I can't give you clarity on, but what I can give you clarity on is in order to be eligible for the waiting list, you have to have recourse to public funds. You have to have recourse to public funds. So you have to have permanent status to remain in this country before you're eligible to access the housing waiting list. No, and it's unlikely that a member of my staff used that exact phrase or that reference, because you have, I suspect it was, you have to have recourse to public funds was probably the answer to that question. And without, I would suggest you email me and I can clarify the specific information for that resident. Everything, the more information you're able to provide me, the easier I can get an appropriate response to you. So, yeah, that's fine. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. Just remind councillors to make sure you're using the mic so that everyone can hear us online. Councillor Kemp, thank you for that. Councillor Peake, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my thoughts together on this. Starting off, just to make sure, because I am struggling to hear, Councillor D is now going to be got rid of from your point of view, because you're saying these are people that already, their housing needs are matched. So if they want to move just because they want to move, they've got to do it through the private sector. Is that correct? Is that what you said? No? Okay. Because you said you were going to get rid of the whole band. That was category D, wasn't it? No?
Band X.
Oh, sorry. That's
apologies.
me, that's
We
me
shouldn't
not
get
being
any
able to
mic.
hear then. Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Shoko, your mic's still on.
So band D is remaining. So band A, B, C and D is remaining. We are removing the inactive register. So that's people that aren't actually eligible to go on the register. We've maintained an inactive register for a really long time. We're not required to do that. So we're going to remove that burden on officers so that they can concentrate on allocating and managing the waiting list and the applications for the waiting list. So no banding is being removed. It's just the inactive register that's being removed.
Sorry, I'm not sure we're having some issues with my...
It flicked, but it's on now, yeah. This is a draft housing allocations policy. Presumably, this is the same policy that will affect people I support. So just very quickly, I work in a home, got a shift tomorrow. It's quite possible whilst on duty, a resident will come to me and say, I want to go into a home choice, and I will support them to do the allocation. I'm glad to, if I heard you correctly, you said that preference of choice is now going to have more emphasis. Is that true?
There's choice-based lettings has been around for over a decade.
But I thought you said there's more emphasis.
No. What it will be is it's personal choice of someone that's on the housing register. So if one of your clients is eligible for the waiting list and they need assistance with bidding, you could discuss, well, do you want to just bid for Twiddle, for instance, or are you happy to live anywhere in Medway and therefore you increase your choice and your chances of being allocated because you're bidding on everything that you're eligible for.
So we've had cases where people have done two choices, and third choice, you either take it or you're off the register as well. But I can't remember the details, so that's one of my concerns. With our clients, a lot of them have drug-related, stroke, possibly violent backgrounds. It's very important that they can actually move away from that gang network, and also very positive to them if they can go to an area where they've got family and social networks. So I'm glad that there is still a recognition of having a preference. Just that my reality is, when I've tried to give people getting home choices, they found it very difficult to get to where they want to be, but obviously choice. So,
Yes, so if one of your clients doesn't want to live in Twiddle, then they don't bid for properties in Twiddle. If they don't want to live in Gillingham, they don't bid on properties in Gillingham. If they want to live in Who, they bid on properties in Who. So that's a personal preference. The less areas that someone bids on, the longer it's going to take potentially to get allocated to property. With regards to your other question, I've just... So, so the choice has always been there. It's just whether or not somebody chooses to bid. So if they don't want to live in a specific area, I recommend you advise them not to bid for that area.
I must have misheard you again, because I thought you said there was greater emphasis on people being able to choose their areas. Is there some kind of difference? But
no. There's always been choice. It's been in place for over 10 years.
This is not really a question, and I don't know there ever will be an answer. We live in a world where we always want there to be answers. I understand category A, why that's really important to keep it as small as possible, to try and create the idea that it has got priority. So often the people that we support will go into category C and they'll just sit there. And I presume the length of time they've been there doesn't help them to go up the stages. That's true. Time itself isn't a factor?
Time itself is a factor within the band. So say if you've been on the waiting list for 3 years, that doesn't make you go up to band A. It means that you're likely to be quite close to the top of band C or the band you're in. So it's that criteria. So if someone applied today, they're going to be further down than someone who applied this time last year because it's in their banding. So band A, date. Band B, date.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I can't actually say, and I kind of know it, but I just wanted to get it clarified. Gosh, there was something else as well. Yeah, the time, you say now expand from 2 to 3 years. I get the rationale behind that. I don't know how much working there is between Medway Council and organisations like one I work for. We have a company policy that we are meant to have people, despite their background, who will within 2 years get to a point where they are ready to leave. We want them out within 2 years. You have a 3-year. And if we've had somebody that's come from a different authority, they won't match your 3-year criteria, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen to them. It's just a thought. Yeah.
It depends if it's linked to a supported housing accommodation,
Right.
a specific supported housing accommodation. There's information around that as well. I've just remembered what your other question was. It was regarding kind of like 3 strikes and you're out.
Yeah.
So what that's based on is if you're offered a property and then you refuse it, it's the refusal as opposed to, you know, you could bid on 3 properties, actually you're not successful for any of those. That's not going to take into consideration. But if you actively bid for properties and then you actively refuse 3 properties that you're offered, that's when then we will review the reasons to why you've...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the other question. It's just my concern about the time thing. I'm not saying this is going to be common, but if we had somebody that we've taken on that hasn't actually been in Medway, and you may think, well, they're not Medway, so who cares? But the fact is they will, after 2 years, we will do everything we can to encourage these people to leave. Rooms are very, very precious, especially if they are ready, they've gone on their journey, they are ready to move out back into a non-supported environment like ours, where they don't match the criteria. I'm not saying you're going to have an answer to this, though. I'm just throwing that out there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. Thank you for this. It was an interesting read. First time I've read one of these. So I only had a couple of very short questions, hopefully. I think I can't find it now, but in here it talks about it's someone who's placed in the borough. That doesn't count towards the 3 years. So someone who's, for example, come as a care leaver from another borough and happens to be in a Medway home, I'm wondering at what point when they set their roots down does the clock start ticking that would allow them the allocation? Just a very quick question, and I suppose really the question on those with an immigration status, if they're placed here by the border force, for example, in some form of temporary accommodation that the border force might pay for or the Home Office pays for, at what point does their 3 years start ticking? If they come here, they go into some sort of accommodation, they get their settled status, they get a job, their children go to school, at what point does that clock start ticking? My final question is, what is income in this context? So obviously salaried and wages, but would it include things like receipt of benefits and things like that? There was one more, but I'll leave you to answer that.
So with regards to out of area placements, so with regards to care leavers, they will still be eligible. They will. Okay. With care leavers have got their own they've got new legislation under new statute. But people placed out here, so examples.
So from Newham to.
Yes. So say for Newham, and they've been placed here. They will have been placed here under temporary accommodation.
Right.
They're still the responsibility of their placing borough. If they are placed here and their duty, so their full homelessness duty, is discharged because it's suitable settled accommodation, they will then do their 3 years and then become eligible. But they will have had their homelessness duty discharged.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. With regards to the Home Office, so until they've got settled status, they can't apply for the allocations policy.
But the fact they've been placed within our authority by the Home Office in some form of temporary accommodation, is it the same process in terms of they get discharged from that by the Home Office? I'm just trying to work out how that actually is going to work, because obviously the Home Office is now moving away from hotels and is renting accommodation around the country. If we end up, it's likely we will end up with people who are either waiting for refugee status to be sorted. Strong likelihood is that they will be accepted and they then become subject to recourse to public funds. Is it at that point that the 3 years starts?
So I think Bex is just finding the right section, but it always used to be the case that the clock would start ticking after recourse had been given, if that makes sense. So a status is given by the Home Office.
Then the clock starts ticking for the 3 years. Great stuff. I think I answered my own question on the income one, Bex.
Yes, you did. So it's household income, whether that be universal credit or earned income or a mixture. So we've got a lot of households that are eligible for universal credit, but also are on minimum wage.
I understand that, yeah. And my final question, I promise my final question, is on the unreasonable behaviour test. Obviously, this allocations property is for existing tenants moving within stock. So if someone who's been subject to some form of antisocial behaviour order, you would say they can't move into a different property until they've had 2 years of, let's call it good behaviour for want of a better phrase. But how are you checking someone who goes onto the list for the first time or applies to go on the list? How do we check that they've not been subject to some other form of antisocial behaviour order? Because the last thing we want to do is take people onto the list. And also, does the ASB refer to behaviour with, I've had this conversation, does the ASB refer to behaviour within Medway or within the vicinity of a home? How are we applying that test as well? Thank you.
Okay, so there's a number of different things. So with regards to antisocial behaviour, it primarily with existing tenants is around their tenancy. That can include the vicinity, because there's legislation that it can include any housing management within the vicinity, or if they've got any other criminality. So if they've got a criminal behaviour order or an antisocial behaviour order, that is an order, and that's criminal rather than civil proceedings. So that will be taken into consideration. We also ask when you make an application whether or not you've got any criminal behaviour. It's the same with with anything, is that we do, we will ask that, and we will ask to disclose that. So we will then recheck it at point of allocation. So it's one of those things where we will ask on the application, and then it's rechecked, because it takes more, it can take anywhere up to 2-3 years longer, and so some convictions will be spent, so you will check it at point of allocation. So when you're going through to nominate for a property, they will check the information that's on file.
And that's through something like the CRB or something?
Yeah, they can check it on, so if it's been disclosed, and also if it's particularly within, so if someone is moving from a 1-bed, say, to a 3-bedroom property, MHS to council, or council to MHS, they can also get references.
Thank you. I've just got 3 questions here. So, Band X, so we're talking about Band X and those people that are on it potentially being removed. What will the process for them being notified that they're about to be removed? And if there's like circumstances have changed, so in particular I'm thinking disability, how would they have a chance to appeal and, be reallocated? Because they might just assume I'm on the list, so therefore...
Yeah, so with the inactive register, they'll all be written to.
Okay.
And what we're going to say is that if there's any change of circumstances, i.e. you may be eligible now, is to reapply. And then we will look at that, and yes, it will be reflected on that, because the inactive register it's not counted. So if they're on that and they get told that they're not, and it might be, well, actually, we've had a change of circumstances and now we've got... less money, low income or disabilities or number of dependents, we will then request that they reapply, and we will look through their circumstances at that point.
Okay, that's just know. Income actually was the next question out of my list. So obviously this hasn't been looked at for 6 years, and you had a figure that stuck for 6 years. I think it's probably a fairer policy that incomes per room, etc. Actually, and actually will help with child poverty. I think actually it's a really interesting, progressive, will help with that. But what I'm just wondering, because it's 6 years, is there any form of kind of indexing throughout that period?
Yeah, so when this was originally put, that was one of the questions that sort of senior managers said, is that you need to index it and check against what it is, which is we did some review of what neighbouring boroughs do with regards to indexing as well. So if you look on the, I'm just going to check now because this is one of the ones that the team have done for me, but it's rounded down or close to assuming more than 35% of a net salary is spent on housing costs. So that's what it's based on. So we've done it on less than 30% on the 30% threshold, which is what is deemed as affordability, what you should be paying for your housing costs.
But that's obviously now, but each year as that changes, is
yeah,
there...
so potentially we will have
deadline?
so we will building an annual review, and part of that will be to review to check whether or not we need to change that income. Yes, so it wouldn't be a change of policy. What it would be is just check that sort of change of income to look at how if it's set appropriately, which is why we've moved it to room basis, which is generally what a majority of local authorities use, is a room basis rather than a one household income fits all.
No, thank you for that. You half preempted my next question, which is comparing with other authorities. Actually, I suspect this is a question I'm going to ask a lot when we're looking at strategies coming forwards over the next couple of years. But alignment with local government reform, obviously, again, you know, mentioned it previously, but have we... is there a policy to align it with other relevant, particularly Swale, Gravesham and Dartford potentially in a model, but, you know, Tunbridge and Malling, Maidstone, for instance, depending on what model comes up, is there work to start that work of working with other authorities and making sure that we're lining, or making sure that in the development of local government reforms, the things that were positive and that we want to protect are put out there, and that we're ready to defend them and to make sure that they're set out?
Yeah, so this policy is written based on our current Medway housing need, based on what we need and what is based on that. This policy can be changed, amended at any point, as long as we obviously go through the process. So when we were doing we did look at surrounding boroughs, but we've also got to be mindful of what currently our allocated demographic and geographical area is. But yeah, going forward, we will be in a position to continue to negotiate that and look at how the others are to ensure that we get the best. But at the moment, this is specifically for Medway, but we can change it as we go forward with LGR.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with Bex entirely. It's got to be a local policy in the first instance. I mean, a lot of the legislation is common essentially. So it's it's very similar. We're probably slightly different. There's probably a lot of areas where the 5-year threshold is actually quite common, probably more common than we've gone for. Probably a bit higher than where we've gone for. What is quite interesting in respect of LGR is there's a very well-developed Kent Home Choice partnership that uses a common system and shares a lot of information and common work that's done across the services. So from that, and in my view, I think a lot of that is actually is much more difficult to get right in terms of LGR policies. We can probably do a piece of work and make sure they align very quickly. But actually all the infrastructure is already there to implement things like LGR.
Thank you, because I suppose one of the things that might be a question as we go forward is, if we look at hypothetical, somebody in Dartford on the edge of Crayford or somebody in Sheppey, what happens with those local connections when those local connections start? How does that work when we go to day one? So I'm sure you're going to be asking all of those questions. I'm trying to not try and not add confusion at this stage, but no, thank you for coming here tonight and present that. Just want to check if there's any other members who want to speak on this matter. Otherwise, I will go to the Vice Chair for a proposal, please.
Thank you. So the committee is invited to comment on the proposed Housing Allocations Policy 2025. To note that the Cabinet will be asked to agree the Housing Allocations Policy on the 23rd of September 2025 for adoption from the 1st of April 2026. And I had that one further action for a request for a breakdown of numbers on the housing register by band. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that support seconded? Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. We're off to Capital Budget Monitoring Round 1, and which I will ask Andy McNally Johnson to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this introduction brief because I'm sure we all want to bring the meeting to a close when we can. The report details the results of the first round of capital budget monitoring for 2025-26 and relates to the schemes within the remit of this committee. It was presented to Cabinet on the 29th of July based on returns submitted by budget managers and includes forecasts for both the current year outturn and future years until completion of the schemes. The first round of budget monitoring is a projected underspend of £846,000 against a total capital budget across the council of £230 million. And the capital schemes within the remit of this committee are projected to underspend by £639,000. The details are held within the report. I'm happy to take any questions members may have regarding this.
Councillor Lawrence.
Just on the Gunwharf regeneration scheme, refurbishment scheme, I note the comment here is that we're not going to replace the roof now because they've done some magic, and I know I've had conversations with Sunny E about this, that actually they sent something away to be looked at, so they've obviously made that decision not to replace it, but we're going to still spend that money on doing other refurbishment works. Am I reading that correctly? So rather than not borrow that money for the roof, we're just going to spend it on more refurbishment work to other parts of Gunwharf. Thank you, Chair.
Would you, sorry, Daniel, you are better placed than myself.
No problem, that's fine. The short answer is yes. That's what we are doing. We're expecting a savings on the rack. We've analysed it. Originally, the majority of the budget was to be used for roof works and RAC remedials, with a small portion being allocated to refurbishment. We've been able to turn that round with effective use of consultants to give us advice on the rack. So yes, we're able to spend a larger portion of the money, we hope. We've still got analysis of the roof leaks going on, but we're hopeful to spend a larger portion of the money to do much needed works to Gunwharf to improve it. It hasn't seen a refurbishment for many, many years.
Chair, I mean, I hadn't even caught this the first time I read these papers. This seems to have been sort of slipped in under the radar a little bit. I'm sure Cabinet and portfolio holders are aware of it, but how much is now being spent on general refurbishment rather than on the roof? Because the roof had to be done because because at the end of the day, parts of the building are unused. I think we all agree that there needs to be some work done on Gunwharf because it's bloody horrible. I spent the day here last week and I was really depressed when I left because it's an awful place to be. But I wonder whether, given the council's parlour's financial state, whether borrowing more money at the sorts of rates that we're currently having to borrow at is good use of our money. I do think we do need to do some remedial work to make Gunwharf a better place, but I'm wondering whether these are the right choices. Thank you.
Right, yeah. I mean, in terms of what we're trying to do with the money, initially we looked at everything we could do to improve it. The initial cost estimates come out way in excess of the proposed budget of roughly 22 million. To do what we wanted to do to improve the property, we were looking at around about 35 million. So we're having to scale back on that, so quite significantly for areas. So what we're left with is still, we believe, enough of enhancement to much improve Gunwharf, but it's reasonable in terms of scaling back. Now, we can share the latest cost analysis of that, if that's something that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think what would be nice is just to see some high-level narrative around what's changed and what's now proposed. I know it's out to REBA 2, so we're getting into that procurement phase now, aren't we? We need to be a bit careful.
Almost at the end of REBA 3.
We've moved that fast?
Yep.
Blimey. Because when I had my last conversation, which was the end of June, I thought that felt like a long way off before getting even that part.
Yep.
Chair, I wonder if the committee would like to receive a note on what's changed. I am a little bit concerned that this has gone full steam ahead, and I don't know if other members on the other side were aware of these changes. I'll just flag a general concern about that.
We'll have that noted and asked for in that. Next, I've got Councillor Cook, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just two fairly kind of small bullet points that have come up in ward work. So the first one at the bottom of page 94 on Country Park charges, it just feels quite different to Kent, where you can't have 2 cars registered on 1 permit, and that's come up a few times. So we've had ourselves as a family and others have had permits for Kent country parks that allow you to put 2 cars on, but Medway you would need 2 permits, if I've understood that correctly. So really interested in that. The bigger one really in terms of the Hook Meadow works on page 97. So there's still some remaining budget there. I know that this is an area that the community is really focused on. We've looked at it quite often with others in that area. Be really keen to sort of know, it talks there about continuing work with cultural services and HRA. Could ward councillors be brought into that discussion? Could there be some community listening on that? Where are we? What's going to happen next? Thank you very much.
Councillor Cook, happy to pick up the question on charges. The general policy at Medway is we don't put 2 cars on 1 permit. So there is differences between ourselves and Kent and other authorities, but just the policy that's been agreed.
And through you, Chair, in respect of Hook Meadow, so we were looking at that scheme very, very closely before the well-reported kind of financial challenges that the authority had. Where this is kind of landing now is essentially around looking at the integrated hubs program, essentially, which is a broader look at all of our spaces, all of our libraries and community hubs, to form a new direction, a new strategy as to how we do that in the future. That's a program that's led through the business support team and Phil Watson and Paul Boyd as part of very closely linked to Medway 2.0, essentially. So we can request some information on that. At this point in time, we're probably, in respect of the Hook Meadow, there's still a bit of a challenge in respect to the finances, essentially, and it's not in relation to the housing revenue account. The general fund would have to provide capital funding in respect of any elements of the community hub or library, and we haven't squared that circle yet.
Thank you. Just a very brief one from me. It's probably just me just need something clarified. So the major item of underspend is around Constant Park. So on page 95. Am I reading the commentary correct to say that it's showing an underspend now, but you're going to reallocate that fund? So in the next future rounds, there would be 0 underspend?
Yeah. What happens is obviously when we produce the report, at that point there was a genuine underspend, but there's an agreement where environments will be used, so that will be used to increase budgets elsewhere to allow further work. So they're haven't been included in this round, so it seemed wrong to go both ways. One way and not the other. So, yes, timing is also obviously just a difficulty when you're reporting these things, but what we're trying to show is what will happen in round 2, but we can't report it yet at this point, if that makes sense.
I'm glad I read it that way, so thank you very much for that. Is there anyone else to speak on this? Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Cook for a proposal, please.
Thank you. So the committee is asked to note the results of the first round of capital budget monitoring 25-26. We've had a request for a high-level breakdown and analysis of the Gunwharf work, and I think we'll probably continue with the Hook Meadow conversations at a ward level. So just put that one on there. Thank you.
Okay, is that seconded? Thank you. Is that agreed? Excellent. Okay, we're now on to the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, which Dave Reynolds will introduce.
So, thank you, Chair. This report was presented to Cabinet on the 11th of February and summarised the budget monitoring positions that have been considered by Directorate Management teams based on returns submitted by managers for the first round of revenue budget monitoring for 25-26. There's a reported overspend across the Council of 10.9 million. Within that, the overall overspend for the areas within the remit of this committee is 723,000. The committee should also note that the Cabinet instructed CMTs for the corporate management team to implement urgent actions to bring expenditure back within budget. Happy to take questions along with colleagues.
I'm going to pass to Councillor Lawrence. I suspect this might be about parking services.
Oh! No, I did have some less contentious questions than that one, I tell you. Could you just explain the line about asset management? I couldn't work out if the 569,000 was an underspend or an overspend. It's really, maybe it was the time of day.
You're entirely right. I noticed that when I was reading it before the committee. That should say that it's an underspend. It shouldn't say pressure. It should say, so that, let me get to that right paragraph, but it should
It's on page 108.
Yeah.
Now,
rather than saying there is a pressure, that should be reading there is an underspend on asset and profit management as per the table above.
So it's an underspend. So that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good number.
Yeah.
Now, on parking services, Chair, you know, I know we like to fleece the Medway motorists for as much money as we could possibly squeeze out of them, and that's before Fairview comes into effect. But this is looking like a terrible big black hole in the council's revenue budget, if I've understood this correctly. We're underperforming on fining motorists, essentially. Yes? And if we're at this point at the end of the first round, what is the projection for the end of the financial year?
So these are the projections for the end of the year, based on those returns for the first that were completed during the first round of monitoring. So all the projections are the forecast for the full year.
So at the moment we're 1.6 million adrift of our budget in a negative way. So parking services.
No, so for parking services, the budget is for a kind of effectively a surplus of 7.8 million.
Yeah.
We're saying we're going to get in 6.1, 6.2, so there is a pressure of 1.6.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
and so that's the end of year prediction?
Yes.
Okay. But that's 16% of the overspend, isn't it? The 10 million, because it's...
There we go. Part of that is the impact of some of those costs should have fallen into last financial year, and they haven't, because when we closed the accounts, we kind of missed some of those accruals. We kind of understand it's a kind of a new service that people weren't kind of completely sighted on what to expect, I suppose, at that point. So that is part of that. There are two issues within that overall figure. One is around a kind of shortfall on income around the red routes, and then there are also kind of additional costs in kind of actually servicing some of those kind of enforcement notices. Postage costs, as we all know, have kind of gone through the roof, and so
Yeah.
so that I mean that's only a part of it, but there are factors in that. I suppose what we'd point out, these are the first round's forecasts, you know, and part of the kind of the implementing the kind of the management action thing is the key one is really about kind of reviewing all the forecasts thoroughly. That will be done and reported obviously at the next round, and that's not kind of trying to push it into the long grass. It's just that's the nature of where we are, and so.
Okay, Chair, it'd be good to have a breakdown of that in a more formal way, if you wouldn't mind. I'm just wondering, what's the bad debt for non-payment of fines? And have we got any idea what that bad debt looks like at the moment? i.e. people who've been fined are refusing to pay.
Not in this particular report. We can take that away, can't we, Ruth, and kind of follow that. There is an outstanding action from the BSDO and the ONS committee about kind of what we wrote off in kind of 24, 25.
I think
so we can probably tag that
on
onto the end of that and kind of enhance that briefing note so it covers
yeah,
25,
okay,
26.
Thank you. And I just had one question. I suppose this is really for Ruth. Is the 122,000 underspend on frontline services? That's bodies we've not been. We're carrying a vacancy rate, I'm assuming. Is that impacting services in any way that's actually we see more complaints from residents, or it's taking longer to answer the telephone? How's that manifesting itself?
It is some vacancies. It's some underspend. To be honest with you, we're in quarter one. So at quarter one, you know, we start by edging our bets a little bit. You know, are we bringing someone in? Trying to get people in is not the easiest thing in the world, I have to say, unfortunately. So it's that doesn't particularly, you know, I'm not too worried about that 120. And what I would say is, in fact, in frontline services, if you look at the complaints, our level of complaints and answering them has actually improved. So if that was a problem, then I would be more concerned about that.
So are we deliberately holding the vacancy rate, or is it just we're finding it? I suppose the question is, are we trying to recruit really specialist roles and we're finding it difficult? I mean, because I find it a bit difficult to believe that given the unemployment rate's gone up 10% in Medway in the last year, that there aren't willing people to come in and do admin roles types.
Yeah, to be honest with you, it's not the admin side of things, it's the more specialist side of things. So it's transport planners, that kind of thing, highways engineers. You know, we try our absolute best, but
as I always say, there's transport engineers and transport planners are great people, great people. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on this? Other than maybe I credit Medway motorists for more compliance, some people might say. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I shall pass on to the Vice Chair for recommendation.
Thank you. So the committee notes the results of the first round of revenue budget monitoring for 2025-26. Committee notes that Cabinet instructed the corporate management team to implement urgent actions to bring expenditure back within the budget agreed by full council. And we've also had that request for the briefing note on unclaimed debt.
Sorry, Vice Chair. I want really an understanding, a breakdown of what the 1.6 million is made up of and what the bad debt element is as well, please.
Apologies. Apologies.
The bad debt. The bad debt will be something completely separate. So it won't, because what we do in terms of accounting is we would make a provision for writing debt off in the revenue accounts, and that's what would feature in this kind of report. The level of outstanding debt is what we would judge that provision on, effectively.
A note on.
Thank you. Okay, following that, is this proposal seconded? Seconded, excellent, thank you. Is it agreed?
Agreed.
You agreed? Okay, we're now on to the petitions report, which is for noting. So was any members wanted to raise anything in particular to, I think it was Councillor Wilde's response to his petition? Okay, therefore can I go to the Vice Chair for a recommendation?
Yep. So the committee is requested to note the petition responses and appropriate officer actions in paragraph 4.1 of the report.
Is that seconded? Is that agreed? Okay, the work programme is here. As you might notice, we have a change of personnel here. So Nicola is taking a well-deserved break, but Steve is here if there's any questions that he can take back on the work programme.
Sorry, Chair. Just for the October meeting, the 9th of October meeting, we did have officers. If you remember, we had an online meeting where we discussed items to go into that meeting, and then an officer very kindly wrote to us and said he could produce a report on economic inactivity. It was addressed to you and I.
Yeah, we'll take that back and get that clarified, because obviously
there's
I was
definitely-
there at that meeting between us as...
Because I think the 9th of October meeting is looking a little bit thin, and it would be great if we could have that report, because I think it's a really big issue at the moment. Thank you.
Accusing these meetings of being thin. This was a thin agenda, and we're on to 2 hours 57. So, but no, thank you. That is noted, and we'll go back and get the result. So, therefore, I'm going to propose the Vice Chair to make her last recommendation of the evening.
Thank you. So the committee is asked to note the report and agree the work programme as set out in Appendix A to the report. The committee is asked to note the action log as set out to Appendix B to the report, with that clarification needed for the October 9th meeting.
And once more, feeling, is that seconded? Thank you. And is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending, and we shall see you in October. Good evening. Bye.